Hi everyone. So I was having this problem, like was consistently jumping between different AI tools like ChatGPT, Gemini, or Grok or Claude for all sort of little tasks like summarizing an article, generating some code snippets, or reviewing some code, or maybe translating or correcting my grammar. And it was driving me crazy. So I built a Chrome extension to fix the thing. So the story is basically I was wasting so much time switching tabs, copying and pasting, and just generally being inefficient. So I thought there has been to be a better way. So I built this extension that lets me access all these different AI tools right from my browser to easy access, and also help me to complete those repetitive tasks with ease. And I'm using it a while, and it's been a really helpful tools for my workflow. So in this tutorial I'm going to show you how I build it, and we are going to start with a really simple project, a background changer extension to cover all the basics of Chrome extension development, things like manifest file, background scripts, then how to create pop-ups, and also how you can inject content script into web pages, and also use case of Chrome storage. Once we've got those fundamental down, we will dive into the main project, building our AI extension. And this tutorial will be perfect for anyone who knows a bit of JavaScript and wants to learn how to build their own custom browser extension. And by the end of the video, you will have a solid understanding of how to build an extension that solve your own problems and automate your workflow as well as. So what exactly is the first project is about? So it is going to be a background changer extension which will help you to change the whole background in any web page from just a right click. As you can see, Chrome extension name is background color changer, and if you open the Chrome extension, then you will be able to select any color. Let's say I'm going to select green, and then you can save it. And then if you right click on any web page, then you can see there are a context menu with the name of the Chrome extension as change background color. So if you click on that, then you can see that the background color change, and the whole thing will work any web page. So you can experiment it on there. So the main purpose of building this project is to understand some of the foundational concept of building a Chrome extension. Now let's see what is our main Chrome extension, the AI assistant that actually solved my personal problem. So nowadays I am using ChatGPT or Gemini or Grok a lot to complete some of my repetitive tasks like summarizing some article, then generating some code snippets, translating, or maybe correcting some grammar issue. So let's say this is a blog page and I want to summarize this portion of text or maybe the whole article. So what I was doing previously is copying all the text from the particular article and then paste it to GPT or Gemini to summarize me back, or I prompt there to get a certain result. But nowadays it's become like so common, so just switching between tabs, copying and pasting becomes like some repetitive and boring task. So that's why I come up with the solution. Why not I select the text that I want to summarize, or I want to do or perform some prompt engineering on this tool, to just right click and select some of my common prompt. Let's say I want to summarize this, so I don't want to copy this and paste it on ChatGPT to get the result. I just want to copy the thing from here, and then I will right click and I will open my assistant menu, and which have some common prompt menu that I can generate. Let's say I want to summarize this text, so that I will just click on summarize and it will give me the summarized version of that particular text. Let's say I want to review a particular code snippet, so I will select that code and select the code review prompt menu that I already configured in the menu, so that it will take the code and it will give a code review with the tools. Let's say right now it is showing that you didn't select any code, so that's why it's giving me that. And also because I am switching between like ChatGPT and also sometimes Gemini and sometimes Grok, and also I am using free version of Gemini, and also Grok provide some free credit, but I have a premium GPT key, so without that you can use this Chrome extension by just simply Gemini key. And for that case, like switching between multiple AI tools, I added the configuration things where user can select any tool they want, like as they can give the API key and the endpoint as well as select the tool. Let's say I want to select GPT, and then if I save the configurations from the pop-up of the Chrome extension, then I can just simply use the same prompt, but it will give the response from the selected tools like ChatGPT. And if I want to choose it like Gemini, then it will also work like that. Now it will generate the response from Gemini. As you can see, this is the Gemini version, which is, yeah, all the time it's giving me a lot of text. So this is kind of the AI assistant Chrome extension that nowadays helping me a lot to perform some dedicated tasks. And as you can see, I have created some common prompt. So these are not like my as usual prompt that I use. These are just a generalized prompt I list out to build this video so that you can also automate some of your repeated tasks using this way. So before jumping into the code, let's try to understand how a basic Chrome extension development flow works. The Chrome extension starts with a file name manifest.json, which specifies the extension's metadata, or you can say the configuration. It included metadata like name, version, permission, and what script it uses. That means we define all the configurations, including the permissions, inside of that manifest.json. So beside manifest.json, Chrome extension work with some scripting file, and we can divide it like 2 or 3. The first one you can say background script, second one content script, which is the most used script. Let's say if you are building any Chrome extension, you often have to use the content script. As you can see, content script, background script, and pop-up script, all we actually define in our manifest.json, including the permission. And about permission, it is actually give the Chrome extension that what are accessible in that particular extension or not. Let's say if you want to access active tab, then you have to define the permission in the manifest.json to tell Chrome extension that you are permitted to access the active tab. Now let's understand all the scripting file that actually help to run any Chrome extension. So first, which is popup.html, you can name it anything, just you have to add the reference into the manifest.json. So this is like the blueprint for the pop-up window. It defines what the pop-up looks like buttons, text box, and you can write it on HTML, CSS to design the UI. So think of like it's a user interface of your extension, as we saw in our main extension, where you can see a little window that appears and you click on the extension icon and can see the UI. And then you can have a pop-up JS, which actually injected into the pop-up HTML, which you can say is like a controller for the HTML. Say in your HTML you have a lot of UI, and of course those UI need interactions and some controlling. So for performing that, you need a script that will help to control the UI. In that case, we are using popup.js. You can name it any of it, and you can use multiple script to inject into your popup.html. Second one is the background JS. You can name it anything, and you just have to refer it in the manifest.json. And the background script is like the behind the screen manager of your extension. It runs consistently in the background even when you are not interacting with the pop-up or any web page. It is responsible for tasks that need to happen regardless of what the user is doing directly with the extension. Yeah, it might sound like technical, but when you see the example of use case, then you will understand what's happening in the background script. But the key responsibility for the background script is it handle event. It listen for specific events like when the extension is installed, when a web page is loaded, or when the user click on a context menu that we already saw in our main Chrome extension preview. And another one is actually help to communicate. It act as a bridge between the pop-up, content script, and other part of the extension. So this is really important script, but you will not use it often until you need it to perform some certain task. Then we have content script. These scripts are like little helper that you inject into web pages. They can interact with the content of the web page you are currently viewing. That means let's say you open a tab and visited a particular website, and in there, if you have a Chrome extension installed and that have some content script, then those scripts are accessible or injected into the all website you visited. Yeah, you can also add restriction for different websites, and you have to do it on your manifest.json file. So the key abilities for the content script is it help to access and modify modify the DOM. They can read and change the HTML, CSS, and other elements of the web page. So as you can see on the background changer preview part, that we change the background color of any page. So content script actually help to achieve that. And also it help to communicate with background script. They can send message to the background script and also receive message back. And now we have a persistent things for our Chrome extension, and this is the Chrome storage, and it's a way for your extension to save and persist data. This means that the data is saved even if browser is closed and reopened. And you can store data with key value pairs, and there are different storage area. Chrome provides a few different storage area, but the most commonly used is chrome.storage.local and chrome.storage.sync. So we will go brief about when you are using those storage. And in our color changer example, we use Chrome storage local to save the user chosen background color. This ensures that color is remembered even the user closes the browser or restart the computer. So as a summary, to understand the development flow for the Chrome extension, imagine a restaurant and the pop-up is the menu where you choose food, and the background script is like waiter who takes your order, relays to the kitchen and brings you your food. And the content script, you can say, is like a chef in the kitchen who prepared the food and changes the as the web page background color we discussed. And the Chrome storage is kind of like the restaurant recipe book where the chef actually stored their recipes. So in our case, we stored color. So I think this explanation makes this concept clear. So now let's jump into practical code. So as I said, to build a Chrome extension, we need a manifest.json file, and I have created a background-changer folder, and inside that I just created a manifest.json file, and it's a JSON file, and that's mean it have key and value. So let's uncomment all the thing to understand one by one. So the first one, like manifest version, this specifies the version of the manifest format we are using. So 3 is the latest version. Then you can define Chrome extension name with the name property. Then you can also define particular version as well as any description you want, and then the permission that we discussed. For our case, for background changer extension, we need active tab permission. That's mean we want to access active tab, and we want to access the Chrome storage. That's why we need the storage permission as well as the context menus, because we are creating a context menu for easy access or easily perform our task. And the permission is really important. If you don't give any permission in the list, then you will not able to perform some certain task. And then we have the action property, and this section defines the pop-up window that appears when you click the extension icon in the Chrome toolbar. We are linking it to our popup.html file. That's mean you can give any HTML file inside here which will refer our popup HTML. So as we discussed here, like popup HTML is the user interface for our extension. So in the action property, you can actually define the popup, and yeah, it must need to be in HTML format. And then we have background script, which actually defined by background property, and of course in manifest version 3, the background script is actually service worker. So you have to add service worker property, and then you have to mention the file, and you can name it whatever you want. So this section actually defines the script that runs in the background and also that listen all the event we discussed. And the last one we have is content script. This section inject our content script, for our case content.js, and it injected into all web page the user visited. And make sure you can add all URLs, and also if you have some restricted web page that you want to specify that I don't want to inject my Chrome extension on those particular page, then you have to mention those web page URL in this list. And also you can add a lot of script file in this particular list. So this is a basic manifest.json file that we need, and we're gonna create all the file that we actually referred in the manifest.json. And as you can see, I've just created all the file. Now you might wonder that where is the popup.js file that we are going to use in our extension, because we injected the popup.html in our action, which will refer the popup UI, and it is like the HTML. And in the bottom of the HTML file, you can see we are injected the popup.js file. It's kind of like the same way we did any vanilla.js project. So if you need multiple script to perform for the popup, or like you want to control the popup with a lot of script file, then you you can just specify those things into here. And it is not end here. You can also use any framework like React, Vue, Angular, or whatever, and generate the main HTML file, and you can inject that into the manifest.json action property, and it will work like the same as the vanilla.js work. So in this video, we're just going to use the vanilla.js, not like any framework, but if I got some enough requests, then I will make a video how you can use any framework to build Chrome extension pop-up. And of course, there are some dedicated framework for building Chrome extension. So if you want to watch video about that, just comment down in this video. So now we have created all the file that we refer in the manifest.json. Now let's try to understand each file one by one. So let's start with Popup HTML. So this is a basic HTML structure for the pop-up window, and it includes a title and a color picker to pick any color, and a button to save the color, and also a small section to display the saved color. And also I added some short style, like in the body I added a width and padding, and for our input I added give like 100% width and also some margin in the bottom, and for the button I just give a green color for the button as well as some padding and some basic style that make our UI. So because we created Popup HTML and also we injected that in our manifest.json file, now let's see how we can actually install or load our extension into the browser. So for doing that, you have to click on the more menu and you have to go to the Chrome setting, and then in the left section bottom of the menu you will find a menu called extension. And if you click on that, there will be a section where you can see some of the button, but initially you will see something like that. You will not see those buttons, so you have to turn on developer mode from top and the right section. And when you turn on the developer mode, you can see there are some buttons, and we have to use load unpack button to use any custom or local Chrome extension. So just click on that and choose your Chrome extension, but make sure you choose the folder which have the manifest.json file in the root. So make sure you choose it with the correct way, and when you load that, you will see the name that you define on the manifest.json, and you will see the description, as well as if you have any background script, then you will see that a service worker is running on the background. And the same thing you can observe on the other third-party Chrome extension, like this one, the JSON formatter doesn't have any background script, so you will not see that there are any service worker running or not. So after that, you have to just refresh any page, and now you can access your Chrome extension. For our case, it was background color changer. You can also pin it. So if you pin it, then you can see the icon toolbar. As you can see, we have the UI that is showing from our popup.html, the color picker, the button, and the styles that we given. So now let's understand the popup.js, the controller for our pop-up. So from the UI, what we are going to control, we are going to target this element when we change the value, and when we click on the save button, we want to get the value from the UI or the HTML, and then we will persist the value in our Chrome storage. So in our popup.js, this is the code that will handle our logic to perform the action. So let's just comment all the thing to explain line by line. So in our file, we are first listening an event listener, which is DOM content loaded. That means we want to listen that event that our content is loaded or not. So when our content loaded, then we have to target or select those elements. So the first element is the color picker. As you can see in the color picker, it's an input field, and we give an ID to target this particular element from our logic, and we are grabbing it like get element by ID with the ID name. And then we need to select the button, and we did the same. We provided an ID to target the element, and also we need the element where we will display the saved color. So for the element it's a div, and inside that particular div we have a span tag where we actually displayed the saved color. And that's why we actually selected those elements first when our DOM actually loaded, and then we are going to perform the click task. Let's say our DOM loaded successfully. Now we pick a color from the picker and click on the save. That means we also have to listen the save event. So that case we have to use the event listener with the click event, and this is our save button element, and we are listening the click event from there. And also we already targeted the color picker. Now we can grab the picker value like this, color picker.value, and then we're actually storing our data into into Chrome storage. And for doing that, you can do that by chrome.storage.local.set method. It is kind of like same when we play with local storage in our vanilla JS code. So you just have to use the method like set or get, and then you have to pass the object. For our case, we are passing a key with like background color, and we are passing the value. And this will actually set the value into our Chrome storage, and then we're actually showing the color into our display section like here. So whenever we change any color and save it, and the color actually shows in the UI. I think I have to reload the extension. So please make sure you reload every time when you change anything in your code, because otherwise it will not get the latest change from your code. Now as you can see that change the color and it shows the color when I clicked on the save button. So this is what we did here. And then another section is, as you can see, in where if we refresh on any page, or like if we come back again and open the pop-up, and as you can see right now we can't see that which data we actually saved earlier. So for that case, we need to get back the data from the storage, and we have to display that data in our UI when our DOM content loaded. So that's why when our DOM actually loaded, we call the local.get method to get the particular value. And if there are the property, because we set like an object, so we can get the value from the object. And if there are any value, then we actually displaying the value in our display section. And also we are actually setting the value into the color picker value. So this is the code that actually handled our logic. So let's refresh it and check that what's happening. So as you can see, after the refresh, when I just come, it is showing the stored value. Let's say I just change it to this color and save it, and if I refresh and open the pop-up again, you can see the stored color actually showing or displaying. So this is how we can use pop-up as a Chrome extension interface to perform some tasks. And if we need to store some data into the storage, then we can add that logic inside our pop-up HTML. So now let's understand the background JS code. So as you saw earlier on the extension preview, for the first project we can select any color, and then we can right click and we should see a context menu, and when we click on that menu, then the web page background color should be changed with our select color. So now we have to achieve the context menu, that how we actually can create context menu in the Chrome extension. So for that we need background script, and inside the background script, let's just comment out all the code to explain by line. So as I said earlier, that the background script actually help you to listen that your Chrome extension installed or not, and that's when we can grab that event and we can perform task. And because we need to create a menu, so we need this event like when the Chrome extension actually installed. That's mean if we get the event like it's installed, then we can create the menu. So you can use chrome.runtime.uninstall.addEventListener, and as a callback function you can pass that, and it will trigger when the Chrome extension actually installed. And for creating a context menu, you have to use chrome.contextMenu.create method, which will take an object with some property like the ID. You must give the ID and also the title, and the ID should be unique for each menu, as well as you have to give a context list where you can define that where is your menu is going to access. If you declare it like page, then it will only open on web page, but if you define it like all, then your menu will appear throughout the whole Chrome browser. For our case, just make it like page, so that we just want to see the menu in any web page. This is how you can create a menu. And now we have to listen that menu click, because this could only created the menu, but how we can actually listen the menu click, because when we click on the menu, then we want to send the message to our content script, so that content script actually change the background color of that particular web. So to achieve that, we have to use this method like context menu, as we did on the create. We will get like onClick.addEventListener method, which will give you callback with argument. So the first one is the menu information, and the second argument is the tab information. So in the menu information, you will get the menu ID, because we have given a menu ID, and we are going to use that menu ID to perform some tasks. So that's why if I just uncomment all the code, we are checking if info.menuid equal to change background color. That's mean if it's the one that we are expecting, then we will do a certain task. If it's another menu, then we will do another certain task. And also we are checking the is there a tab information available or not, because we need current tab ID, because to sending message from background to content, you must have to pass tab ID, because in the Chrome there are tabs and there are also active tabs. So if you want to perform any task in active tab, that means you need to get the tab ID. So that's why we need tab information. So after that, we are taking the color from the storage with like localhost.get, and we're passing the key and we are getting the data, and we just took a variable to store the value. Then here we actually did the messaging or the communication part. We called chrome.tabs.query method, where you have to pass an object as a first argument, where you have to specify that you are looking for active tab or not. So because we are doing it in our active tab means this one. If I go to this one, then this become like the active one. So we must have to pass active true and also current window true, because if you don't pass current window true, then if there are many window and those are like active, then it will not identify that which window you are actually referring. So make sure you also put current window true, and if you do so, then you will get a function that will give you the tab information. And as I said, we need tab ID to send message to our content script. So we will get the tab ID by tabs list and the first index dot id. So it will give you the tab ID, and we have to use the chrome.tabs.send message, which is the method that will help to pass message to the content script. And the first argument it required is the ID, and the second argument is the data that you are going to pass. And we are going to pass an object with the property called color with our saved color that we get from the storage. And with that, we'll be able to successfully send message to the content script. So this will be just it for our background code. So if you move to the content script code, because we are pass messages from background script like this, we must have to listen the message, or we must have to receive the message. So that case, we need to use the listener method, and you will find it chrome.runtime.onMessage, and that method will give you the function which have some argument like request, sender, send response. And in the request argument, you will get the object that you actually requesting from the message, and sender will give you the information about the sender, where it coming from, or the details. And the send response will help you to respond back to the sender. That means if you send message from background, then you can also respond back to the background, and you can also grab it in here. So we just need to use the request, and because we are passing an object and inside that we have a property like color, so we are grabbing the value from there like request.color, and we are setting document.body.style.background color is the color we are getting. That means we will get the active tab, and we will took the document from the tab and change its body style color to the color that we actually getting from the background message. So this is just it for our content script. As I said earlier, that content script actually helps to modify the DOM of the particular web page that you want to modify. So let's just try to refresh and check that our Chrome extension is working fine. So after refresh, let's just set a color to pink. Then let's see, we have the menu. Yes, we have the menu, and let's click this, and as you can see, the background color just changed, and it will work any web page. Maybe some web page will not work because we are targeting document.body.style.background color. So any web page doesn't have the body tag, then it will not work. So let's summarize the whole thing. First, we have created the pop-up, and it actually referring the popup.html file where our UI contain. And for controlling the UI, we need a JavaScript file or the JavaScript script that will control the UI. So for our case, we have popup.js that is injected in our popup.html that help us to retrieve the information from the UI. And then when we click on the save button, then we have to save it to the storage. That you can see we set it to the storage, and also we get back the data to display that what actually the value we set earlier or older value we can display in the UI. So this is one part. Another part is we have to create a context menu. So we are using the background script to create a context menu, and we have to use the install listener. That's mean when our Chrome extension install, we are listening that event and we are creating that menu. And then we also have to listen that particular menu click. So that's why we put on click listener on the particular menu to send the message to our content script, so that content script can change whatever we want to change. So in our content script, we listen the message and we perform the task that we want to to in our DOM. So this is how our basic Chrome extension work, and how background communicate with content, and content do the modification part of our DOM element in any web page. And one thing you might ask, like, is there any way to directly communicate from pop-up to content? I would say yes, you can directly communicate from pop-up to content, and it's kind of like the same we did in the background. You just have to send the message from pop-up to content. So for that case, in the pop-up you have to use the same method like we did chromes.tabs.query, so that it will query all the tab, and if you are giving the object, then you will get the current tab with the current window, and you will get the tab information, so that you can pass the ID on the send message param. So you just can take this part of code into your save handler, where you are clicking on the save button, so that whenever you change any color and save it, it will directly affect on your content script with the in the DOM. That's when you can also communicate directly from pop-up to your content script, as well as you can do it like from background to the content script. And as I said, there are an option to communicate back. Let's say in the content script you want to send back response, you can use the argument and you can send back response to the sender that actually sending the message. So this is how the whole thing work, and I hope you understand basic and the fundamental concept to develop a Chrome extension. And I think now we can move into our main Chrome extension development. I have just created a folder named AI Assistant in my desktop, and I bring all the code in this folder. So let's understand step by step all the code. Start with manifest.json. So in the manifest.json, as I explained earlier, that this one is the version, then the basic information of the extension. Then for our AI assistant, we need several permissions that we didn't use on the previous project. Let me zoom in a little bit, and as you can see, we have active tab, scripting, context menu, tabs, and storage. So we need all of these permissions for building our Chrome extension. The active tab will give you the tab related permission, scripting will give you the permission for scripting the content, then the context menu will give you the permission for the menus, and we have tabs that will give all the tabs permission, and the storage for Chrome storage. And as I explained earlier, the content script will contain all the content related code. For our case, as you can see in the JS array, we have almost 4 scripts, and as you can see, the last one is content slash index.js. It's in the content folder, and the index.js is the main content script. And we have 3 more. The first one is about a third-party JavaScript library which help to parse markdown text. So when you see in the live preview that we are using AI tool, and those tools are give the response like the body as a markdown format. So that's mean for showing that body into your website, you need to parse those markdown text into the HTML format, so that it actually displays with the nicer way. So that's why we need a third-party JavaScript library that help to parse the markdown into HTML code. So that's why we added that in the script list. And also why we added in the content script, because as I said, we are clicking the Chrome extension from right menu click, and when we perform the action, we actually sending message to our content script to perform the selected prompt. So that's why when the content will generate the response, then the whole thing will happen in the content script. So that's why we must have to add the external library if we use. And we have 2 more, which is kind of like the UI file that will handle our UI related code, and there are another one which is the handler that will handle the UI logic. And about the background, we already understand that we need to refer a script that will work as our background script, and it's on the background folder index.js. Then for the pop-up, we have pop-up folder and we have index.html. And in addition, I add some icons to recognize our Chrome extension, and the icon is on the SS folder, and you can use different size of icon. I just use one to just make it simple. So that's it for our manifest.json file. Let's look into the file and folder structure from the diagram flow from here. As you can see, we have to create bunch of menu like the context menu and all the related code to create menu and handling event from that menu will be contained in the background script. That's mean if you can see that we have a background folder and we have 3 files. One is for menus. This will contain all the menu in a object format, and I'm gonna explain all the thing a little bit later. Then we have the index.js file, which actually hold the main code, and we have context menu manager, which is a class that will contain the logic to create menus and also handle menu click and also send message to the content script. So these 3 files actually hold the background script, and we are injected that by simply on our manifest.js. So this is the pop-up UI that we are going to develop, and because it's an UI and there are some form input, then we must need some kind of controller that will control the UI. So for handling that, we have created a popup.js file which will contain all the logic related to that particular UI to handle or to take those input from the UI and store those input into the Chrome storage. That's mean when user will fill up all the information from the input, our popup.js will listen them, and when we click on the save, then we will took those information and store into Chrome storage so that we can use those data into our background script. Now the last one is the content script, which will be in our content folder. As you can see, we have 3 files, and as I said, that prompt UI.js, which is going to be the code for UI, because we have 2 parts of UI. One is, you can see that it's kind of a loading, so we will this loading when we will fetch the API from the tools. So this loading will be part of our UI section. And there are another one which is a model, and in the model we are actually displaying the response which coming from the tools API. And as I said that I'm using a third-party library which is mark.min.js. It's like mark.js. You will find the minified version. So this is the documentation that will parse our markdown response into HTML, and you can use it by installing from npm, as well as you will find that you can directly use from an URL like this. So if you visit this URL from this browser section of the documentation, and then you will see that the minified version of that library. I just download that minified version of code and injected in our script, content script, and I have created a folder called lib, that's mean like library, and inside that I've just added the full code that I actually downloaded. You'll not understand any of these things, it's just like a compressed minified version of the library. So if your Chrome extension needs some sort of third-party library or the external library, you can just simply use by this. So when we got the response from API with like GPT or Gemini, then we actually pass the response to the library function that the marked library actually providing, and the library function actually help to parse the whole thing and generate an HTML in return, and we use that HTML to showcase the API response in a organized way in our model. So that's why there will be 2 parts. As you can see, there will be 2 parts. One is for UI, another is for handling all the logic, and that's why in the content script you will find index.js, which is the main file, and prompt UI.js, which will contain the UI related code like as the HTML and the CSS and initializing those HTML into the DOM. And we have the prom handler, which will handle all the logic related to the UI that we have, including like calling the API, then parsing the response, displaying on the model. So all the thing it will handled by this file. So as summary, in our pop-up folder we have all the file related to the pop-up, and as a lib folder or library folder we have the third-party mark.js library that help us to parse markdown file or like markdown response into a HTML format that we can display that on the UI as a HTML format. Then we have the content folder which contains all the content script, which we divided in 2 parts. One will handle our UI related thing, another will handle our logic, and we use this both file into our main script to actually perform the whole task. Then we have the background folder which have one file that is actually a data file where we are just using as a data source. For our case is menus, and we have another one which is the main handler that will actually handle background script and including the menus and also sending message to the content script logic. And we also injected those file into our main index file so that we can modularize the whole thing into file by file to manage or handle more code. And I think it's also a developer friendly way to just organize all the code into separate file. And as you saw earlier on the first project, we just created 3 or 4 files, including like background JS, content JS, or like popup JS, and we put all the code there. And although that extension was small, but when your extension become big and when there are a lot of functionality, you must have to use a modular approach. And right now we are actually building the application extension with vanilla JS, and which is kind of fine for a small kind of extension. But if you want to build a solid, bigger and production ready extension, then you might need a dedicated framework. As I discussed that we have like WXT framework or Plasmo framework, we must have to use those to build a production ready Chrome extension. Although you can build a production ready application with vanilla JS, but yeah, it's not fully recommended. It's depend on your project size. And also you will not be able to get the bundler feature with vanilla JS. So if you have a lot of separate file and if you want to use TypeScript, then you will not also be able to do that with vanilla JS things. So you must need a dedicated framework for that. So if you want to learn those framework, so I'm saying again, you can just comment down in this video so that I can list out any of the framework for our upcoming videos. And the last one was the asset folder, which just holding the asset. You can also put CSS or the external file. And as you can see, we have like content.html. Now you might ask like why this is for. So it's just an HTML file where we actually puts the HTML and CSS that we used in our content script for the prompt UI. So in content.html is just the prompt UI which we develop first before we actually use that in our prompt screen, because in the content script you are not able to directly use HTML or CSS. You have to use the HTML CSS with JavaScript, which will inject your HTML and CSS together into the DOM. And of course there are two ways to inject that. One is directly injected into the website DOM and another is to use shadow root. And we actually use the shadow root method because if you directly inject something into the main DOM, then it will be a conflict. Let's say we want to inject this model into any web page, and in our model we have some class for styling that particular model. So what if in this example website we have another model which actually have kind of the same classes that we use in our pop-up model? If you directly inject the UI for your Chrome extension, then what will happen for those websites? Those will be conflicted together because when you injected your UI, it might take some style from the main website and also from your Chrome extension. So it is really bad practice. You must use shadow root or like the shadow DOM to actually index a particular UI in through content script. So now let's learn what is shadow root or like shadow DOM that I'm talking about. Shadow room is kind of like a mechanism that help you to build isolated UI. So now you might ask, what is that? So it's like, let's say you have a house and there are like 4 rooms and all the room have a consistent design and style. But what if you want a room to be unique, different, or like separate from the whole house's style? So that case, you have to design that particular rule separately and you have to isolate that thing separately from the house. So the same kind of things happen in the shadow DOM or shadow root when we use in the main DOM. It is like the website DOM, and when we injected some UI into the main DOM directly, it's actually conflicted between together. But when we use shadow DOM, we can separate the UI including the styles with its own manner, and we just display that as like we want, and it will not conflict between our main DOM and the website. So this is the reason we must have to use shadow DOM content injection, because without that, and there will be possibility to conflict your extension UI with the web page UI style and all the things. So I'm gonna explain it the code later. Let's just try to understand the code from from Popup UI. So in the Popup UI, as I said, that we need an HTML, and as you can see, our UI is kind of like this. We need 6 input like text field and the password field, where we are gonna put the key, and one is for selecting what tool we are going to use, and then a save button to save all the information in the Chrome storage. So for achieving that, we need to design the HTML. So for designing the HTML, I am using Flowbyte. It's a CSS library that use Tailwind CSS behind scenes, including some pre-designed components which actually make the library very plug and play type library. So I always use this when I need some fast implementation UI design. So we are just using it with the CDN link, and then we added a body style like the font family and some padding. And of course you must have to put an width of the pop-up UI body, because it is the main width that will display when you actually open the pop-up. Let's say here, when we open the pop-up, you can see it took the 60 pixel width. If you give it 100 pixel, then it will be 100 pixel. If you give like almost the whole screen, it will took the whole screen. So make sure you put a fixed width, otherwise it will be kind of like auto width. And also in the bottom of the file, we injected the controller script popup.js, and that was it. And for the UI, you can see that we have header and also a short footer. So for that, I just add an h2 element with a p tag, and also these are the style I just grab it from the Flowbyte. They have some pre-designed components that always help to design fast. And if you go to the typography section and the heading, then you will see there are lots of variety of design, and I just grab this one and then small up the size of the text as well as the description. And for input, you'll also find input field. I just grab a field and just using the same thing. And as you can see, we have a level and also the input field, and I make sure to add an ID for identifying that particular field. Let's say for ChatGPT, I have added ID equal to GPT endpoint, and for the GPT key, the same input, I just change the label and change the type to the password, and also add an ID to GPT key. Same thing will go for Gemini, like the endpoint, Gemini endpoint, and the Gemini key, and the key is about the password type. Same will go for group. And the last one, which is a select element, that also bring from Flowbyte. You will find in the select component and kind of like a design ready select component, and I just tweak it to like give a label and also give an ID of like toggle. You can give whatever name. I just give it like toggle. I think we are just selecting one options from the drop down, so just I think toggle will be fine. And then a save button with a gradient color, you will also find it in the button, and if you scroll down below, then you will see some cool gradient color button, and I just simply grab it and just put an ID like save button. So these are the ID that will help us to grab those element or target those element in from our controller script or like the popup.js script. So, and for footer, we just use a fig caption. This is also taken from Flowbyte. You will find various example if you just explore a little bit of this library. And also you can use Tailwind CSS. As you can see, the whole library and the component actually use Tailwind CSS style. So it's really easy. You will get two things both together, like the predefined components, and also you can modify them by Tailwind CSS. So now let's understand the logic part for this particular UI, which actually containing in our popup.js file. Let's zoom out a little bit to adjust the whole thing. So let's try to understand from the top of this file. So these are the 4 variables that actually holding some constant value, like the default key is just some stars. So you might wondering that why this value we need. If you look into the UI, then you can see in our secret key input field, when we put the input value and save the information into the storage, and when we come back again, then we can see the endpoint as a text but the key as a password field. And even we inspect the particular element and try to change the type to text, then if we directly show the key on the input field, then it will not be secure, or like it will be kind of not good thing, because anybody can just then inspect that particular UI and grab the key. So that's why I just added some star in a variable to use it when we show those key value in the UI. Let's say if someone inspect and change the type to text, then they will not show the exact key, they will only see some star on that particular value. And we handle the whole logic in the code, and you'll understand when I explain that. And there are those in endpoint. I added some by default endpoint because I don't want to grab and put all the endpoint every time, so I just make those into variable and put the flexibility to that so that user can add them again. And we have GPT, Gemini, and Grok, and of course you will find those in like the studio from each tool provide. For GPT it have its own playground, and for Gemini it have its like own studio. Grok have also its own dashboard where you will find the API endpoint as well as the key. And I'm not showing how you can generate key or like how you will find the API. You can just simply go to their website, and if you purchased any key, then you will easily find that. Or if you are only using the Gemini, the free version, then it's like Google AI Studio where you can directly find the key and the link. Now let's understand what we did. So we have two sections, as you can see. One is listening the button that we define on the UI. So before just going to the logic, let's just refresh our extension and let's see what actually showing in our UI. And as you can see, we have the Chrome extension. This one I just pinned that, and this one is the first one. So if I unpin, then the first one will be gone, and this is the UI look like. And as you can see, we are showing those values after we save the information. Because it's like a running extension, so I already set some keys and values, so it is showing those values from storage. So we have to handle the thing in our code. That's mean initially all the input field will be empty, but when we just fill those information and save it to the Chrome storage, then whenever we come back again, we should see all the fill up information filled up again in the UI, excluding the key, because we don't want to show the key. Even we inspect the particular element and try to change password to text, you can see we are only showing the star, we are not showing the key. So we just handle it trickily to not showing the key. And of course, as I discussed earlier, that pop-up UI have its own inspect element part, like the Chrome debugging part. So if you want to inspect and try to play around, then you have to inspect it from your pop-up UI. And for content, you can directly inspect it from here for content script or content UI. And for background, as I said, you will find it in clicking this service worker. So now let's understand what's happening in our save button. It's just a simple JavaScript code that actually listening our save button, and specifically the on click event with the ID, like get element by ID. And then I'm just grabbing all the input field, like we have 6 input field as I said, and the last one is the select element. So I just use the method called get element by ID to targeting that particular element. So first we just use some variable to store the keys input, GPT, Gemini, Grok. Then we use for GPT endpoint, Gemini endpoint, Grok endpoint, and as you can see, I grab it by ID and then grab the dot value. And for endpoint, I also pass, if there are no value, then I just pass the default endpoint that I declare here. Same goes to Gemini and also Grok. And for the select, it's also the same. There are like no tricky part, it's just grabbing the element from ID and then grabbing the value. So all these variable actually using to grab those particular value from the input field whenever we click on the particular save button. And then we put a little validation over here, because we don't want to give user the ability to save without filling up all this information. So when you use this extension, you must remove this validation, because you might not have all the key, you may be using only Gemini. Then you can just put the validation for Gemini, or maybe you can just remove the validation, and when you are using the extension, you must have to fill that information so that it actually store in the storage. So for now you can just ignore the validation. I just check that if there are like no value, then show an alert. And then because we already grabbed those value into this particular variable and we also check the validation, now it's time to store those information into the Chrome storage. So here we play a tricky part, which is like we didn't directly storage or like directly store those value into our storage. We first check that is there any available data stored into the storage or not. If so, then we actually check some condition. Let's say we already set 2 endpoint as well as with the key, and we don't want to save it again when we add a third one. Let's say if I just show you the flow, then you will understand it better. Let's say initially all the input field was empty and we fill up all the information and we save it. So what will happen here, we will grab those value, we'll check the validation, and here it will try to get those data from the storage, but it will not find available data from the storage. So it will actually put all the value from directly the HTML, and then it will create an object, and then we are storing that object with the chrome.storage.local method, that what we already discussed in our first project. But what if user came after saving the information? So that case we must need to handle this carefully so that user don't have to put all the key or like all the old data again. So that's why we actually retrieving those old data to check that we have any new data filled by user or not. So how we are checking, we are not checking all the value, we are only checking the 3 of our keys. Let's say the logic is like if this GPT key is our main value that we are grabbing from here, and if it's not equal to default key which is the star. Now you will say that how it become like default key, why it will be default key, because this is a section, and as you can see we have another section. This is the section when, or the event when the DOM content actually loaded. That means this will trigger when our UI loaded successfully, and here we did some functionality. Let's say we actually target those element including the select option, and we check that is there available data or not in the storage. If there are, then we just took that data and we set those data into those particular element. That's why when you refresh and come back, you see all the information fill up in the UI. So that time we actually store, or we actually set those key value with the default key. We are not directly setting those value with the exact key from the storage. We are just setting those input value with the default key like this star. That's mean if I just initially put any key and save it and come back again, in our storage the key is intact, it will not affect. But in our input field, as you can see, when in our DOM content loaded event, we grab those input field and we just change the value of that input field. So that's mean we are not changing the storage value, we are just changing the input field value with the default star. And also because it's not showing the star because our input type is password, that's why it's showing like password. So because you change the value of the input field with the default star, that's mean when we are going to click on the save button, then it's general that we will get the value as a star from those input field if we come back again, right? So the scenario will be if you initially save something, then it is stored into the storage, but if you come back and open the pop-up again, then we set the endpoint value in the input field, but we didn't set the exact key in our key input field. We just set it like a default value like a star, so that user will not be able to inspect and change the type to see the secret. And because we set the value to a default value, that means we also have to check when we save or edit those information again. That's why I put the condition that if the new value is not equal to the default key, that means we can say that we actually change the value, so that I actually pass the exact value that coming from the input field. But if that failed, then we are sure that the user doesn't change the secret key, then we just took the secret key from the storage. As you can see, we use the get method and also the key and the data, and inside the data we have the key intact in our storage because we didn't modify that. So we just took that from the storage and we put that value as a fallback when our condition doesn't match. And we need to apply this logic for 3 of our field. That's why I have just added this logic to actually play this trick game. And for the endpoint, you might ask that, okay, for the endpoint, if we set something, then why we didn't took that endpoint and put check the condition or like something like that, because we already passing a default endpoint, so we don't have to put that check here. So in summary, we just in the shape handler, we just took all the information from the storage first and we check that there are new key fill up or not. If not, then we created the object and we actually set the object to the storage, and when the storage successfully stored the data, we just display an alert. So this is the first section, which is kind of like the save button, and the second section, as I discussed, like it actually rendering the stored information in the input field. So the first, all these variable are actually targeting those particular element where we are going to put those value, and then we call the get method to get all the data from the storage, and we put that into a variable, and we check if there are any value with the name, like if there are GPT key or like if there are a value for GPT secret key, then we just change the input field value with the default key. We're not just storing the main exact value, we're just storing it like a default empty star. And the same thing will go for Gemini and Grok. But for the endpoint field, we just taking those field value from the storage like this. We have created a variable to store like the storage data, and then we are passing that data into each field, including our select element. You can see select AI, which is the element, and we are setting the value to our info.select AI, which is coming from the storage. So this is the second portion of our code. In summary, we have two handler for our pop-up UI. One will take care of the save button and the related logic, and another will take care of the rendering part when we come back, or when we come to edit, or when we come to see that what are the data we actually set up, and including sometimes we often need to switch between multiple tools. So that's why this particular section is really important to render the older data to check that which particular tool we are currently using. So if I save it like Gemini, and you can see the configuration success. So this is how our pop-up HTML and pop-up JS, the logic part, actually work together. And let's say your application is quite big. In your popup.html have a lot of input field, or like a lot of configurations, or maybe a lot of UI, then you might need a lot of script to handle those particular code section. So you can just simply edit all the separate script file, and you can just inject those script bottom of your HTML file, and you can handle all the logic there. So this is all for our pop-up. So now let's move into our background script. And as we discussed that in our background script, we are going to create context menu in any act tab, and of course the tab should be with a current window. So let's look into our code. This is the background folder where we have 3 files, and index.js is our main file, which we actually injected in our manifest.json background property. In that index.js file, we imported 2 of our other files like the menu.js and context menu manager.js. So let's discuss about menu.js, and then we'll move into our index.js file to understand what's happening here, and then we'll understand how the main logic of our background script work. Menus.js, where it actually contains all the menus. So as summary, this file is working as a data file, and the data is kind of like an object, and inside that object we have key, and for the value we have another object. So the pattern of that object is kind of same. We are storing object with the property key and title, and the key is unique identifier for our menus, and the title is the menu title. As you can see in the UI, we have all this menu, and the name is actually the title, and the key will work as unique ID. So you must have to put the key as kind of like unique ID for creating context menu. So we have correct grammar, code review, summarize, generate post, and the last one we have is generate reply, which is actually have some submenus. Let's say generate reply, we have positive reply, negative, and some other category. So the pattern is also same for this object, but we have to add a list with the same object. Like you can see that key and title we have, and in the submenu you can add the same object that we declare on our main menu, so it will work same as our main menu work. And of course it will need an unique ID that will represent the menu existence. So this is all about. And now you might ask that why we didn't use a list. Yeah, we could use list, it's just your choice, whatever you want to use. I just use object so that I can put a key, and inside that key I can set the value so that I can directly access with the key name. It will be easier for me. And also you can see that the main object key is kind of same to our value object keys. That means if I just get this key, that means I can access the whole object. So that's why I put same key in both objects. So now let's understand what is happening in our index.js. So I refer the index.js as a background script. That means whenever our background script triggered or run, or whenever our extension installed in the browser, this script file will run. And if you want to grab that event that I want to check when actually our Chrome extension run, so for that case you have to use a dedicated method that we already use. You can see that chrome.runtime.onInstall. So whenever any extension installed in our browser, and if you add this script in the code, specifically in the background script, then you can grab that event. So let's just understand line by line what's happening. First, we actually imported the menus, and you might be wondering that how in the vanilla JS code we are using import statement, something like we did on like ES6 syntax. So this import script is kind of different. So this script actually refers to a JavaScript function used to import external script file in the background script, specifically service worker as well as the web worker, and it is used for modularize the code and make it easier to manage. However, it's just specifically a method of the web worker API, and in the Chrome extension it can be used in our background.js file, as well as if you have any web worker file also work there. But the problem with this script is if your script have some DOM dependency, then it will not work. DOM dependency means you will not use like document dot something on that particular script. As you can see that in both of our script, in menu and in our context menu manager, we didn't use document dot something like window.document dot something. We didn't use because we'll not get that, because this is kind of a native function that help only import those files which are related to service worker or like web worker. You'll not be able to access those. That's mean background script or like service worker or web worker script are kind of like a separated thing that run on different section, which doesn't have the permission to access of the DOM like we did on our Popup.js. We can access DOM element like this, like document.getElement by ID. Then you will also use this document on the content script, but you will not be able to use the document in the background, because as I showed you earlier, when you install the Chrome extension, you got like a worker running on the browser with the extension, and that have its own dev tools, and that means it's actually a separated thing from our main section. So that's why you will not be able to get the document object. So make sure you use it properly in only these two files. And I just import menu and also the context menu manager, which is a class that will handle our main logic. Main logic means it will handle to create our menus. It will handle the click event from the menus when we click on the menu, and then it will also handle the send message to act. That's mean, as you can see, when we right click, then we should see the main context menu and all the submenus. So in this particular class, and specifically this function initialize menu, it will help to create all the menu so that we can display those menu. And then handle menu click, which help to handle when we click any particular menu, including the submenu. And the send message to active tab, it actually another handler that handle when we click on a particular menu and we actually send message to our content script. So it actually work for handling send message, and the whole class actually taking in the constructor menus. That means when we initialize this class, we must have to pass the menus, and the menus are is actually this. So as you can see in the third line, we actually created an instance of our context menu manager, and we are passing the menus. And as you can see, when you import with this syntax, this function, you don't have to import those particular object or something. You can just simply define that particular variable from other file. Let's say we have the menus variable, we can directly use it into our main file where we injected or imported that particular older file. The same will go for context menu manager. We can directly use this particular class. We don't need to import like we did on our ES6 syntax. So in this particular line, we just created a new instance of our context menu manager so that we can use, or we can just pass those menu and we can use those method to create those menus when we right click, as well as the all handling things. But now the question is when we should create those menu. And as I said that we have an event that actually trigger when we install any extension in the browser. So that means, as you can see, chrome.runtime.uninstall, this is the method, and which have add event listener method that actually trigger when we install any new Chrome extension, and that time we have to create those menu, because otherwise we don't have any option to create menu. Because when you install the Chrome extension, and that's the perfect time to create and render those menus so that we can use those menu across the browser. So that's why I use this function as well as the listener, and it's like the same. We work with like the vanilla JS on event listener. It will give the callback function, and in the callback function you can actually perform the task. And as you can see here, we are storing our menu into local storage, like Chrome storage. You can see chrome.storage.local.set. We are setting those menu. Why we're setting those menu? Because we have to access it in our content script. As we discussed earlier, that we can pass message from background to content, so we can do that way. But I think our data is kind of like big, and that's why we choose to store those menus into the storage so that we can directly access those menus in our content.js. So that's why we are just storing those menu whenever our install like extension actually install, and then we are actually calling menu manager.initialize menu, the method that actually coming from the class. And whenever we call these things, I'm gonna explain it a little bit later, but let's just understand the main thing, that it will create the menu when we install our extension. And now we have created our menus, so we have to handle those menus, because handle means like we have to handle the click event from the menu, because just if we just create those menu, it will just only show those menu, nothing will happen. So we have to handle the click of all the menu we have. That's why we have to listen that particular click. So why we have to listen the click? Because it's like a general thing we did on our vanilla JS code. When we click a particular button in a DOM, we must have to listen that click event so that we can do a certain task. Same logic, the same thing also apply in our context menu. So whenever we clicked on a particular menu, we must have to listen that click to perform a certain task. So that's why we are using chrome.context menus.onClick.add event listener. So this is another method that you will find from the Chrome API, and you can see that we are using .chrome a lot, and this is actually the API that provided from Chrome browser to use it to access all those things. So, and if you remember that we also added the permission of a storage and also the context menu in our manifest.json. So that's why when you used chrome.context menu, you will get the access. If you don't give the permission there, then you will not access the click event or even the storage. You will get error. So that's why make sure you added the permission. And the same thing we do like vanilla JS. We listen the event, and in the vanilla JS we got like the event information, that where the event is coming from. Same thing also happened here, where our menu click is coming from, or which menu we are actually clicking. So that's why it actually have a callback function which have two arguments. The first one actually the information about the menu, and the second one is information about the tab. That's mean when we click, or like when we right click on a particular tab, and when we click on a particular menu, then we need the menu ID as well as the tab ID, because for sending message to the content script there was a requirement. The requirement was the tab ID. So that's why we must need a tab ID to identify that which tab we are actually trying to send message from the background JS. So that's why we are actually taking the menu ID, and as you can see here, we are actually calling the menu manager.handle menu click, the second second method that we have. This method will handle our logic about on click of a particular right menu. Now you might ask that you are saying that we also need tab information, but you are not passing tab information here. So if you go to the handle menu click, this will actually handling the logic of our menu click, and also it is actually calling our another method called send message to active tab. So this method will help to send message, and in that method you can see we are actually querying over all the tab and trying to get the active tab with the current window, so that we can identify which tab or which current window, which window we are actually in and we are actually clicking from. So that's why we are not actually passing the tab information here. Yeah, you can also pass it, but I thought like using the query, tabs query will also help to just grab that current window. And as you can see, we have the function including the argument, that's the current tab, and in that current tab we can simply get the ID. So you can pass it from here, also you can grab it by here, but the good thing is you can just simply pass it from here so that you don't have to query from all the tabs. It's like double task, so why you should do the double task? I did it for like explaining you that how this function of the method actually work. So let's back to this one, that what we actually done. So in the background script index file, we are just creating or initializing our menus and using our main class, as well as we are listening the on click of the particular menu to handle our certain task, or like sending message to the content script. So this is all about in the index.js file of our background script. Now let's understand the context menu manager, where we have three menu, and let's start with the first one. And as you can see in the constructor, we actually taking the menus when we initialize the context menu manager, and we just store it into this dot menu as a local scope data. So the initialized menu will do two things. First, it will create the main layer of the menu, and then secondly we have nested menu, so it will also create nested menu using the submenus dataset. So for doing that, our dataset is kind of like an object, so we have to make it an array. So for achieving that, we need to get those value as an array format. So that's why I use object.keys, and I pass the menus, and this will return the list of all the values. That's mean it will return this object, this object, this object with a list like array of objects. So here we will get the array of object including the values, and then we are iterating on that particular list to get a particular menu. Let's say first it will visit it to the correct grammar object, and we are storing that particular object into a variable so that we can use it and create our first layer of menu. As you can see, we are also using the API from Chrome and the context menus dot create, and as you saw earlier that in the index.js we use chrome dot context menus dot on click. So this is also the same method part of our context menus, and you also see that how we created menu in our background changer extension. So the same thing, we need just an ID and the title, and also what context we are going to apply. So as I said earlier, the all will help to visualize all the menus throughout the whole extension, and the page will keep the visualization on any particular page. So I want it like to show all the menu in throughout the whole Chrome extension, and throughout the whole Chrome extension means if I add page, then it will only open in our page, but if I add all, then you can, if I go to this part, it's like a default Chrome extension page of the tab. You can also see that we have a particular menu in here, so kind of like that. And then we have to create the submenu. So sometimes when we are iterating, we are getting the particular object, but sometimes we will get the object with the submenu. So that's why we have to check that we have any submenu or not. So if the parent menu dot submenu available, then we will create nested menu. And how we will create nested menu? We will also iterate over the submenus and we'll create those submenus. So for doing that, parent menu dot submenu, it will always be a list like this, and in the list we will get the same pattern of the object so that we can use the same thing like we did for the top layer menu. So we just iterate with the for each and we get the submenu, and then we also use the same method we did here, and we pass the ID, title, and the context, and lastly we added another ID which is parent ID, which will refer that what is our, or like what is the submenu's parent menu. So you must have to put the parent ID so that the submenu will identify identify where I have to go or where I have to visualize on the menu section. So that's what we have. So if you create, let's say, submenu in the summarize menu, so that it will iterate and it will match the condition, and it will also create submenu for summarize. So this is about the initialize menu method. So it just help us to create the menu in the browser. Now, as you can see, we have the second method, which is handle menu click. And as you saw earlier, we use this method in our index.js when we actually listening the menu click. So we're actually listening the menu click from the method on click from the context menus, and we are passing the click menu information to the method, and the method will take the information and it will perform some task, some logic. Let's understand what's the logic. So you can see in that particular function there are another function, so I just close it for now. Let's understand this part. So here we also did the same thing we did on our initialization. We actually looped through all of our menus, and then we selected a particular menu to perform the task, and we store in the variable and we pass the value to our local function including the menu id. That means this function will take menu id and a particular menu, and we are looping over all of our menu, and we can get the particular menu and we'll pass the menu id with the single menu. And you might now ask that why we need another function. So it's a kind of recursion function to handle or like to grab menu click even we have nested menu. Let's say in the general reply we have submenu, and because the data set is kind of same, if there are another submenu in our code, then we can also manage that with that particular function. So I write that functions so that I don't have to write it for multiple nested layer in the future if that come. If I just code it like assuming that we have only second layer of menus, then the code will be different. But when we use recursion function, we can make it as like kind of dynamic thing. So if there are any submenu come on our nested menu, then we can handle that as well as. So that's why we need a recursion function to handle multiple nested layer or like unlimited nested layer. But sometimes if those layer are like too big, then it will create some performance issues. So when you are using it, make sure you are using it correctly. So that function will trigger. Now you might ask, what is recursion function? So it's like a function where inside of that function we actually call the same function itself, and in that particular function we must have to add a stop point. Otherwise, let's just assume if you call a function which function have the code which actually calling the same function itself, then what will happen? It will infinitely call the function again and again. So that's why you must need a stop point where your function will execute when your function will stop executing, so that you can actually get some task done. So that's why this handle menu will take the menu id and the menu, and we're checking that our menu id is equal to our menu.key. That's mean first time it will go to this object and it will check that our menu id which we clicked and which we get from our handle menu click argument or like parameters, and we can match with that. If we match with the first one, then we can make sure that okay, we are click the first menu. Then if we click on like ask anything, because we are looping through, so we are looping over one by one. So if one menu id is matched with any of the id, then we can identify that yeah, we actually clicked on this particular menu. But what if we have some submenus, because it only work for first layer? That's why the recursion function actually come here. If we just let's say here just ignore this part for now, understand this part. This is the stop part when we execute the recursion function. Here we are checking is there any submenus or not. If there are any submenus, and we are just looping through all the submenu, and we also call the same function itself in here. That's mean as a purpose of this function, it actually check that a particular object key is actually matching with our information key that we get from handlement function. So whenever that match, we actually return true. That's mean we found the key from our menus, we have done of the execution of this function. If we don't find let's say here we actually return the value. So if we don't find, then we just return false. So it will loop through all the submenu and it will call the same function, and the same function will take the menu id that we are getting from here, like we pass from here, and also the submenu, and submenu will be similar like this. So let's say if it have also another submenu, then it will do the same. So it will go over here, then it will come over here again, then it will check that on that particular menus have any submenus or not. If so, then it will again call the function. So it's kind of like recursive thing. If you just fall into this trap, then you will not get out from it. So just understand from bird view perspectives so that you can understand the core use case of this function. So, and of course, if you practice some of the problem using recursion, then you will just easily understand what's actually happening and how all the steps actually work in a recursion function. So I would highly recommend to practice some of the problem regarding recursion. This handler or the recursion function will help us to identify which menu we have clicked, and if we didn't found, then we just passing as a return false so that the execution of that function actually stop. But as you can see, when we found the key, then what will happen? So in this line, we are checking the menu ID is matching with our menu key, like the object key or not. If it match, then we are stopping here, and we also calling our third method, which is send message to active tab with passing the menu up. Let's say we are comparing with summarize to all the value. So it will first iterate to grammar, then it will iterate to code, then it will come to summarize. Then it will check that our current click is matching with our key. Then when it match, then it will took that particular object and it will call the send message to active tab and passing the full object as a argument of that particular function. And that's it. The whole thing happened in our handle menu click. So the menu click function's purpose is to identify which menu actually clicked and then pass it to the third function, send message to active tab. So this method, as I said earlier, that it will help to send message to the content script. So this is the argument that we are taking, like the value of the menu. That's mean the message is the object that we will pass. That's mean when we click on a particular menu, we are passing the whole object to the content script so that content script understand that which menu we click. So that's why I grab the value, and the same things I told you, like I am querying over all the tabs and find out the active tab including its current window or not. So you must have to pass this object to get the active tab and also the current window, and it have the callback function that will give you the tabs, and if its tabs length is like greater than 0, then we will proceed further. Now you might ask like why it will give tabs, like not why it will not give only one tab, because we are querying over with the query like active true. That's mean if you have multiple window in your Chrome browser, then and the same tab could be open in the multiple window. That's why it is actually giving a tabs list. So you have to grab the first tab so that you can understand identify the which was the current window. So that's why we are grabbing or checking that tabs.length have more information, like more than one tab, so that we can grab the first tab information and send message to our content script. As you can see, for sending message to our content script, we have to use chrome.tabs API and the method called send message, and it will took the ID and as a first argument, and the second argument or params, it will took the message as the data set, and the third parameter it will took the callback function that will run when the message successfully sent. And with that you can also use like passing some message back to the, or like it will run when you actually grab that message and send some message back to the sender. So this is what it will actually help to handling that. But the main thing is you have to send message like this to passing the ID including the value. And now we have passed the value, so we must have to listen the message so that we can grab the value. So that time we need our content script to listen that particular menu, and not like listen the particular menu, it will listen the particular message and perform some tasks based on the message, that what we did in our content script. And other than that, in our background script we don't have any other functions or code that do other things, just we have 3 functions that have specific purpose to perform. So now let's look into the whole thing from the UI, that our menu has created or not. So let's just try to refresh it and refresh here as well as, and if you right click, and you can see that we have all the menus including the sub menus. And it should also work with, if we select something, then we should see the menu that's also working. So this is how the background script actually initialize contact menu. So now let's move into our content script. So as our requirement in our content script, we need to add functionality about the loading. That's mean when we select any particular text and right click, then we should see those menu from background script. And then if we click on any particular menu, we want to send the message to our content script, what we did on the background script section. So that's mean because we are sending message from our background script, we must have to receive that message in our content script so that we can perform our desired task. So in our case, let's say we click on a menu which will generate post. So that's mean we have to receive the message, then we have to process the message with the selected text and have to call the API from the tool that we already selected from the pop-up, let's say Gemini, and then using that tool we will call the API to get the response. And in the meantime we want to show the loading, and when our API call finished, it will give us response. Then we will remove the loading and then we'll open the pop-up or like the model where we will display the response with markdown parser so that we can display the response organized way. And also we need the functionality for the model. When we click on the copy button, then the whole text of the response will be in our clipboard and the close button will close the model. That means there are some logic we also need to write inside of that model code. So let's look all the thing from the code. So in the code we have 3 files in our content folder, and the main file is index.js, which is injected in our manifest.json at the end of the array. And why it's end of the array? Because this work like one by one. Let's say the first priority will be this one, then the second one will be our prompt UI, then the handler, and then lastly our index.js. So if we just declare this here, then it will work, but I think good practice is just declare it at the end of the array which you are actually referring. And because in the manifest.json we added other file as well as, so it will help us to use or share code between files. Let's say if I want to use the mark object from this third-party library, we can use it simply just declaring that particular method as we did here. Let's say we are using prompt UI on our prompt handler.js. As you can see, this is the object, or like this is the class, and the class is coming from here. This is the prompt UI, this is the class that will handle our prompt UI, and this is the handler for prompt handler that will handle the UI logic, and this is the main index file which is holding the main logic. So that's why when you have multiple file, you just have to mention them here so that you can share code between each file. So now let's understand one by one file. So in our index.js file, you can see we are using Chrome API and the runtime and on message listener or on message method which have add event listener or like add listener, which will actually listen any sort of message coming from either background, either pop-up. As we discussed earlier, we sent message from our background script like this, chrome.tab.send message with the tab ID and the message from this method. And whenever we click on a particular menu, we are sending the message. And that's why we must have to receive the message. And that case we need to listen that on message event from our Chrome API. So for listening the message, we need to use this method, and it will give you a callback function which have a parameters like message, where you will see it is referring the data we are passed in our second parameter from send message method. That means you will not get the tab ID because we are passing tab ID as a first parameter, because it's not give you the tab ID. Instead it is actually using the tab ID to send the message to that particular tab. So that case we are only getting the message, and we are passing the message as an object. So we will get object when we receive the particular message. Let's say this will be the object that we pass from the background. Not only background script, if you pass any data from let's say popup.js, then it will be the same. You can just listen the message from content script using this method. And what we are doing here is we receive the value, and we are also trying to fetch our menus from the storage. That's why we call Chrome API to give the menu that we stored when we initialize all the menu, or when we installed the extension. We triggered this function and we store our menus into the Chrome storage, because I told you earlier that we are going to use the menus directly in our content script. So that's why we stored that, and that's why we are actually getting those menu back from the storage to use here. And for the menu use case, you can see that after getting the menu, we are creating an instance of our prompt handler class, and then we call a method from prompt handler dot handle. So this is the class for handling all the logic about this particular part. So that's mean it will handle the loading, it will handle the model as well as the API call and the response parsing, all that. So that's why I divided the whole thing into two parts so that it become really easy to maintain and understand as well as. So in our index.js, our work is kind of it. We will just simply get the data from the storage, the menus, and we will pass the menus and also the information that we get from the message. That's mean the information was which menu we clicked, the menu object. Let's say the menu object will be like this. So now what are the data we have in our content script, which is we are getting the menus, like all the menu we will get, and also which menu we have clicked. So we will also passing that value into our prompt handler, and we are calling prompt handler.handle method that will handle the rest of the thing. That's mean when we click right menu of any particular menu, then it will directly took that particular text we selected and it will open the loading because it is calling the API in the background. And then when our API responds successfully, then we actually hide the loading button and open the model and showing all the response there. And we have the button, we will handle those logic as well. So that's why we just need to pass those data and we have to call the particular method. So that's why we just created an instance of that particular class and we just call the method that will handle all that. And inside that function we have multiple function, multiple use case that actually happen. So now let's try to understand the prompt handler, but before that we need to understand prompt UI because we have some UI like the model and the loading. So that's mean there should be some sort of UI code that need to be handled. So for that case, in our prompt UI you can see we have several methods. The initialize method will initialize some of the styling things, and as I told you earlier, we are injecting our UI into shadow root. We are not injecting our UI into the main DOM, we're injecting it in the shadow DOM, and I explained the shadow DOM and the other in the first project, so you understand from there. And then we are injecting the styles here, like the initialize will create the shadow DOM and it will attach the model or some other things. I will discuss the thing. Let's try to understand from bird view perspective. So the inject style will inject the style into that particular design, and then one function is for show the model. That's mean when we call this particular function, it will took the content and the text result. Text result mean the text that we are going to copy in our clipboard. So that's why we have to give that. So this show model will open the particular model that we have. And then we have another function called hide model, which will hide the model we have opened. That's mean we are going to call the hide model in our cancel button, and we are going to show the model when we successfully fetch the response. And then we have show loading and hide loading. That's mean when we click the show loading function, it will show the loading UI, and when we call the hide loading function, it will hide the UI for DOM. So these are the function that will actually work for our UI, and mainly the UI is about the loading. So that's why we have two methods. One will show the loading, another will hide the loading, and one will open the model, another will close the model. And when we are opening the model, we need to pass those data that we are going to display. So that's why we have some parameter on that function to manage the whole thing. And before doing everything, we must need to initialize the shadow DOM so that we can inject the style, and also we have to inject style as well as in the shadow DOM so that we can get a isolated UI which will not conflict in our website. So that's why we need this prompt UI, and it's just a class so that we can reuse it every time, and we use it on our prompt handler class. So from our index.js we call our prompt handler.handle method. So now let's try to understand the whole logic from our handle method, and then we will explain you about how I actually put all the UI related things. So let's find out the handle method. So this is the handle method, that actually the main method that we have called. And for the UI, I would say just think like we already built the UI and try to understand the logic first, then we will go for how we actually implement implement the UI thing. And for right now, just assume that when we click the show model, then it will open the model, and if we pass those value, then it will show the model with the data. And then if we click hide model, it will hide the model, it will actually remove it from the DOM. And if we click show loading, it will show the loading, hide the loading. And if we initialize, or if we create an instance of our prompt UI, then it will automatically inject and inject the style, or the create a shadow root or shadow DOM, so that we can see the model and the loading in our web page. So just assume that these are the function will actually help to achieve that particular result, so that we can understand our main logic part here. So in the handle method, it first checking that this dot selected test. If there are no selected tests, then it will show the model like this dot prompt UI dot show model, please select something. That's mean whenever we, let's say here, whenever we are in a web page, if you try to click on a particular menu, then it will show this. Let's say you selected correct grammar, but you are showing please select something. That's mean you didn't select anything, because our main Chrome extension functionality is we have to select something, then we have to click a particular menu, so that we can perform the prompt with that particular text. So for handling the whole thing, we must need some select text. Now you could have been asked that where we are actually getting the select text. So that's why, as you can see in our prompt handler, we actually initialize the class passing our menus and only the message. And if you look at the menu, it's like the data set only, so we are not getting the selected text here. Then the question might be where we are getting the selected text, like which text we actually selected from the browser. So that's why we have to look into our constructor method. The constructor method will run when we initialize the class, and as you can see, we did some task in our method. So the first thing we did, we actually call this dot initialize API info. That's mean we call this method and we pass result.data, and that's mean we are passing the data that we have got from our storage. And as you can see, we are not only retrieving the menu, but also retrieving the data. And now you might ask, like, what is the data? So the data is the information that we actually stored in our storage during our pop-up section. Let's say in the pop-up we are storing some credential and endpoint. As you can see, we are storing the GPT endpoint, we are storing the API key, as well as which model we have selected. So these are also the information that we already saved in the storage. So that means in the content script, what we are doing here, we are using three things. One is our menus, second is which menu we have clicked, and the third is our API credential and the data. And combine all the thing, we will use those API endpoint to retrieve those data based on our selected test, as well as we can identify that by actually the information from our menu. So that's why, as you can see, we have a method that will actually help to initialize all the information about the API credential. So that's why I just pass result.data, and the data is about the API credential. And then we are creating these menus as a local scope variable, which will store all the menus from the result. Like these are the storage data. And then for the message, it is actually storing the main object of our menu. That's mean it will be the selected menu that we have clicked from the context menu. And then you can see that we have this selected text, which is calling a window method, window.getSelection.twist. That's mean when you call window.getSelection method, it will give you the selection. So if I selected this and we call the getSelection method, then we'll get the text. So if we try to access it from here, let's say we can access it or not, window.getSelection. If you just call the particular method and if you hit that, then you can see we are getting an object. So you will not see the whole thing like as a text, you will see a lot of like object and the properties. So for getting the exact value with a readable format, you have to make it as a string, otherwise you'll not see the exact value. And when we just use like .toString, we just get the value what we have selected. So let's try to select this particular text and try to enter the command again, and you can see that we are getting the particular select text. So that's why we actually use window.getSelection method, and we just parse it to the string so that we can get the string value. So this is how we are actually retrieving the particular selected text from our DOM and use it in our background script code, because as I said earlier, you will not able to access any DOM from the background script. So that's why we have to done this in our content descript, because in the content descript it will allow you to access the DOM of that particular website. So, and the last one we did like this dot prompt UI. This is also a variable which will actually initializing or creating an instance of our prompt UI, because as I said, prompt handler is the logic part and it will handle all the logic. That's mean we need the UI class so that we can actually render the UI. So if we just initialize or create an instance of this particular class, then we can use all this method. And if we just simply call this dot prompt UI dot show model, and if we pass the data, then it will open the model. If we call this dot prompt dot hide model, it will hide the model. If we call the loading, then it will show the loading as well as hide the loading. So that's why we need the prompt UI class to actually handling our UI related thing in our prompt handler code. So this is what happened when the constructor method actually called when we call the prompt handler or initialize the prompt handler. And as you can see, like the first method, this dot initialize app info. So let's see what it actually do. So here you can see we are getting an object, and the object is basically the data, and this is the same object we have passed from our popup.js. As you can see, when we call the save button and we created an object like this, like GPT key, Gemini key, Grok key, endpoint, and the selected AI, and we are storing as a data format with the object in our local storage, and we get the data back here by this get method, and we pass the whole result with our prompt handler, and in our prompt handler we are get that from our first parameter, and then we pass result.data, and result.menu is the menus. So result.data was the object, that's why we just destructure the object here to get all the exact value. And as you can see, we are getting the endpoint, the key, as well as what AI model we have selected. And then we just simply created some local property or local variable to store those information. We can do the same thing here, but it makes more sense if we just separate the logic of the credential so that it will be more organized. So that's why we just call the method to create some of those variables, like let's say OpenAI endpoint, OpenAI Gemini endpoint, Gemini Grok endpoint, key, and the selected AI. So we just grab those value and we store in our class scope so that we can directly use like this dot Gemini endpoint, this dot Grok endpoint whenever we need. And as you can see, we have some other method, but before that we are getting, when we are initializing this prompt handler, we are getting our prompt UI class in our class scope. Like we will get the value of the prompt UI. We can now call all of the method from here. Then we'll get all the menus like in our this dot menus, and then we will get the selection menu, which is basically the message. We are just referring it as a message so that we can understand that which menu we have selected. And then we have selected text as well, as which is the text that we are selecting from our UI. And then we have all the credential that we required. So we will compare with first this one, like which AI tool we have actually selected. So if we select, let's say GPT, then we'll only use OpenAPI, like OpenAI endpoint and OpenAPI key, or like OpenAI key. So if we use Gemini, then we'll use the Gemini endpoint, then Gemini API key. Same will go for the Grok. So that's why this selected AI value is important to perform the whole thing. And based on that, we will actually call the class method to actually perform like opening model or closing it or whatever we need. So we were in our handle method because we just call the handle method from our main file. So if we just call this method, then it will check that we have selected text or not. If we don't have any text, then we should show this particular text on the model, and that's why you can see this dot prompt UI dot show model. We have just called the show model method and we pass those value. Let's say if we just pass the first argument, which is the content. So if you pass text result, it will perform a separate thing. If you just only pass the content, then it will only show the content that you have. And the content is kind of like the element, and the text result is the actual text that we are going to get there as a response, because we need two things. One is the content in that we are going to inject in our model, and the second one is the text result, which is the text format of that particular response. If we click on the particular copy button, then we must need to save those response in our clipboard. So that's why in our show model we have two particular parameters that will handle different tasks. So if we just pass the content, then it will only show the content. That's what we did here. We didn't pass any text. So that's why if we don't have any selected text from our window, then it will show the model and it will return back. So that that it will not execute any other. But what if we have some selected text? So that case we have to do some certain things, which is first we have to took that particular text, then we have to took the selected tool. Let's say which tool we have selected, that means we need the data, and then based on that we will actually call the particular API with the tool using the endpoint and the key, and then we will wait for the response, and then when we get the response we'll actually show the model with that response. So you must have to understand the flow, that what actually happening is step by step. So because we have to find the selected text and we will get the selected text value, and also we will get all the value that we need, that's why we have to do a logic that will help us to call the API with the particular text we have to get our response. And as well as we need another thing, which is the prompt, because as you can see in our menu that each of the menu have its own prompt, means these are the different kind of menu that handle different tasks. Let's say for correct grammar, it should took the particular text and correct the grammar. That's mean our prompt should be the instruction like correct that particular text grammatically, kind of like that. Then for the code review we need another prompt like review this particular code, and for summarize, which is kind of different. So that's why we also need that particular data as well as. So that's why we have some method that will help to generate that prompt. And as you can see, we have that method which is like get user content. So this is the menu, or like this is the function that will take the menu. Menu means this particular menu, so that we can identify which menu we have clicked, and then when we got the menu we will actually match with our prompt, or like which prompt we are going to use. And as you can see, when we call this method and pass the menu, let's say if we selected correct grammar menu, then as you can see it will match and it will give you the prompt. Let's say like this, correct this text grammatically and this dot selected, and we are getting the selected text because we already assigned the value when we initialize our class. So this is how we'll get the selected text, and this will be the prompt. As well as it is going for the generate post. Here is the prompt like generate a new post based on the following content. You can just add whatever prompt you are trying to automate. So for my case, these were the prompt that work fine, so that's why I just added this general prompt to perform those tasks. For summarize, we have summarized the following text and we are just giving the test. And also for code review, you can see that I have added a bunch of instruction, and as well as I just put a formation so that we can understand that which that we are actually providing some code, and I have added some of the key point to verify from that particular code. And then I just write the text like please provide a code review based on this code, and there are some instruction that I want to get the result. And it also goes for like ask anything, tell me about this, and this means like the select test, then we can understand what this is. And then for generating social media posts, I also write a prompt that will generate post for X, LinkedIn or Reddit and etc, so that it can create a generalized prompt. So these are the prompt that we'll give when we call this method, and we are going to call this method a little bit later, but I'm just explaining you that what are the prerequisites to perform the whole thing. So now I think you have understand that what are the data we need. So if I just summarize, we need API credential, one API credential, then we need selected text that which already have API credential, which is also we have, then we have selected menu, then we have the user content. It's like user prompt, you can say user prompt based on the menu. Sorry for my typo. So based on the selected menu we have generated user. Now we can use all these things to call the API and get the response back, and when we will get the response back, then we can show the model. So that's why as you can see I have write all the logic. So let's just not look this object first, because if you just look it now, then you'll not understand what I have done here. So as you can see, I have created some of the variable, and lastly I call API. There is a method which is called API. So for understanding this particular logic, we first have to understand how a tool API actually work. So if I simply said how a Gemini API or like GPT API actually work, so it's like there would be an endpoint, let's say api.com, and the endpoint should be with the post request, say post request, and that particular post request, that we must have to pass a payload or like a body, so that it can respond back to something or it can actually insert something. And the body we pass, which actually is a kind of a payload that will actually take API in our server, then server actually do the thing. So in our case, we already have the API, and now you might ask what is payload, and the payload is our prompt, because when we call that particular tool API, we must need to pass the prompt as the text with the thing. So that's why we need a payload that will actually organize our data to the corresponding format of that particular tool need. So that's mean each and every particular API need kind of its own payload, or like a formatted data itself to actually generate response. So if I just explain you that things, then you can see we have 3 function here and the 3 function here. So let's try to understand the payload function. So we have 3 payload function and 3 API function. So let's see the create GPT payload function. So this is the function that will create our GPT payload. That's mean we have the selected text and we have the user content text using the get user content. That's mean when we call create GPT payload, it will create a payload with our prompt. And as you can see, we are returning the payload, and the payload is kind of like this. It's an object with a property called message using the model. That's mean we have to define that particular model on that particular payload. So this is the payload that actually accepted by GPT with that particular endpoint. And of course you need to pass the prompt, and as you can see I have passed the prompt in our second item. So this is kind of like the behavior you will get when you actually call the API with the particular tools. And you have to put some instruction as well. Let's say for GPT we have to put a initial instruction, and the role is like the system, and the content is like a system. When we chat on the chat GPT, we can see that first time we got a message from the system, so that's why it's kind of like the same. And the second time we put something, and the third time we actually get the result. So this is how we this is how the chat GPT generative AI API actually works. So that's why you have to write those instruction, and inside those instruction you have to pass the prompt so that it actually create a payload so that it can understand by the particular model to actually give the actual result. So this is how we actually created the model for GPT. And if you look into the second one, which is for Gemini, it's kind of like same, but we don't have to give some instruction like the GPT we did. And yeah, you can give also some instruction. You can find those in the documentation. If you need some complex sort of prompting, then you must have to pass those kind of instruction. But here we just generate the content based on the menu, and of course guest user content will give you the particular, you just visited the method, you can see that it will give you a text, organized text with the selected text with the prompt. So if we see, then in the text it will be the prompt, and if there are no text then it will return, but if there are text then we just passing the payload for our Gemini. And it is kind of like contents, which will take the array, and inside that array we have object, and inside that object we have parts and the text. So you will get the particular payload format in the documentation when you are actually generating key or using the API. So if you visit the OpenAI documentation, then you can see that this is kind of sort of like a payload that you can pass, or like it's a response I guess that will give you after the payload you have passed. And as you can see, it gives you the instruction of how you can make request, and this was the payload where you can select the model, and also you can pass the message that you want to generate some text. So you will find bunch of example how you can create the payload. And as you can see here, also you can see here as well as that how you can create payload with your text to send the body with the particular API. So you will find the same for Gemini as well as for the Grok. All you have to do is just explore the documentation to actually get that particular payload format, and then in that particular format you have to actually bind your prompt so that can actually use that payload and generate the particular rest from there. So let's try to look into the Grok, and the Grok payload is kind of same like the OpenAI. Here is your prompt, then it will took the prompt here as a second message. The first message is kind of like a system. You can just remove this thing as well, as it's not important, but yeah, it's just for understanding that how many item you can add. Like you can add like instruction like this so that your generative response become more accurate or something like that. So make sure you actually create a perfect prompt or a payload so that you are get, you get the actual or the accurate result from the generative API. So these are the three functions that will create payload, and you can understand it by reading the name. And then we have other three methods, which is called GPT API, called Gemini API, called Grok API. And from the name you can understand that these three functions will actually call the API. So let's just try to see the call GPT API. That means it will call the API. And as I said earlier, for calling the API we need the endpoint, then we need the key, then we need the payload, and that's it. We need three things. So if we have three things, then we can call the API and we can use the response and perform some task. So here you can see when we call the call GPT API, then before calling the API it actually started the loading in our UI. So it's called this.prompt UI.show loading. That means it will start loading on the DOM, and then we actually call the API, and we also return the whole thing for this particular function. So we use like the fetch from the vanilla JavaScript code, and we pass the endpoint. And as I said earlier, we already set the endpoint in our initialize API info method, so we can just directly access it from this.openAPI endpoint. And in the second argument we have passed the object with the method in mentioning like post, and the headers we are passing application/json, and of course we need the key to be passed on the authorized property on your headers, including the barrier text, and then space, then your key. So this is really important. If you don't pass the key in the authorization value, then your API will not work. It will give error that you don't have any permission or something like that. And as we discussed, like this.openAPI key you will find when we initialized it, so. And the third one is the body, where we are actually passing the payload, and this method will take the payload, and the payload is basically the prompt that we will actually generate it from here. So these are the method. Like the API method is kind of like distinct independent method. So if you just call this method, it will do only this task, so it will not do other than that. So that's why we just make all this method independent, because we want to perform different tasks based on what we have selected from the pop-up. So for doing that, I cannot add all the code in one place, so that it become messy. So that's why I just independently divided those particular action into separate functions, so that we can use those function in our main handler. As you can see, I have created an object here, then I did some code. I am going to explain it a little bit later, but I call the API with the payload, but the payload and the API will come from based on some condition of our selected model. As you can see, this dot selected AI. So let's just go back here. So the API will to call the information like the post and the token and also the body, and then it will give the response, and then we have to parse the response from JSON so that we can get the data. And here we are getting the data, and inside the data for our GPT we have to kind of like if destruct that message, we have to destruct the message from the whole response. So that's why we just call like data dot choices dot the first array items and then the message that content. So you have to console log, or you have to check the response, the whole response, to identify where is your expected generative response, so that you can extract that particular data and then you can pass it to your model, so that model actually show, display and perform the whole task. And as you can see, after calling the API, after getting the result data, then I actually store that value or like extract that value in a variable. Then simply I just call this dot prompt UI dot show model, and in that function I just pass a p tag with the result, which is a markdown format response, and also passing the same result in the second argument. That's mean, as I said earlier, this show model will take a content which is going to be the HTML content, which will be injected in our shadow DOM, and it will display the thing. And the second argument is the actual text response, so that when we click on the copy button we can actually select the particular text. So that's why we have to pass two separately. And then as you can see that it will handle the error. So if we got any error from the API, then what we'll do, we'll also show the model, but we'll show as a error format. Let's say this will be error equal to be like error.message, and the error you will get from the API API response and the catch method. So that's why you can see we are using like .then, .catch, and .finally. And finally, we are actually hiding the loading because we already open a loading before we call the API. So we must have to hide the loading when we have actually finished. Let's say and the finally method will call when our response actually finished or we get any error or not. So whenever happen, we will actually call the finally method, and the finally method will trigger the this.prompt UI.hide loading. That means it will hide the loading from the UI. So this is how an API call work for GPT, and this kind of same happened with the Gemini. It will first open the loading, then it will put the API endpoint like this. You will find the API endpoint in our popup.js, which is kind of similar like this Gemini endpoint. Then we have to pass kind of parameters or queries to get the actual API, callable API. So then we have to pass the method, then the headers, and also we have to pass the body. And as you can see in the Gemini, we don't have to pass authorization key as we did in our GPT. Then how we are actually passing the key? We are passing the key in our query. As you can see in the API query, we have a value which is key, and the key will be this.gemini key. That means the key that we need to pass. So that means for Gemini, the URL will be kind of like this first, then it will add the query with the key and the API key, so that it actually took the API key from the query. So this is kind of like a way how you can call the API, but it's not a good way, because if you just use the key like this, then you can see the API call from the network tab, and you can grab that particular key from there. So that's not a good way to call the API. So you will find some other document from Gemini so that you can just use it like authorization in the header. So I'm just using it as a key for explaining you that there will be different kind of way to call the particular API based on particular tool. So that's why we have to pass all the thing first to fetch the API, then you will get the response, and if we find any error, then we will throw the message. We did a kind of different thing in our Gemini. You can do the same thing as well as based on your requirement. I just throw the message if there are any error, because I want to show the error from the API, what actually API gives. But in our GPT, we didn't actually show the API that we didn't show the error from the API. We just show a error that is coming from our .catch method. So for handling that, like the API error, we must have to grab that particular API error. That's why, as you can see in our response, when we get the API done, we get the response. If the response is not okay, that means there are error. That's why we just created the error by manually handling that particular logic. So, and then there are no error, then we can just simply pass the JSON to our formatted data, so that we can actually grab that data and extract that particular text, and we can show the model as we did in the ChatGPT API call. And we identify or extract the particular text from this data.candidate. Then in the candidate there are array. From that array we are getting the first element, then in that first element we have content property and the part property, and then another array, then text. So you have to study the response to actually find the particular text that you have provided, because when you get the response from the generative AI or any tool, let's say Grok, Gemini, or any tool, the response is huge, and on that particular response there are a lot of value which mention how many token you used, what are the model you use, and so many things there. So you have to extract that particular text, response text, from that particular JSON object. So you must need to do that. But how you do that? You have to console the response to identify where is your text. So for Gemini, this is how we get the text, and it is also dynamic. Sometimes it will only be follow this flow, sometimes it could be different, so you have to check every time when you implement it with a particular model. And then we have just open the model with the result of the value including the raw text, and if we got any error from code, then we also show that error as a model format with this, and then finally we just hide the loading. So similar thing like GPT, and if you saw the Grok, which is also quite similar with the OpenAI or GPT, it's kind of opening the model first, then we are using the endpoint. We also pass the token in our authorization headers, so we are not passing it like Gemini, and also passing in the body with the payload, and we also check the response is okay or not. If it's okay, then we are showing our error and then parsing the JSON. Then as you can see how we are actually extracting the data. It's like data.choice 0 message.content, where we'll find the exact message that we need, and then we store it in a variable. Then we did the same thing, like opening the model with the result and passing the raw result, and if there are error, we show the model as well as with the error, and finally we just hide the loading. So these function are its own specific task that will perform when we call this function, and the task is it will call the API and it will open the model as well as it will hide the model, or no, it will not hide the model, it will open the model, it will open the loading and it will hide the loading. And for closing the model, we have a functionality in our model UI that we have a close button. When we click on that close button, the model will be closed. So these three function will only help to call the API, show the loading, then show the particular message that we have got from the response. If there are any response that come from API, then it will show the response in the UI, and if there are not, then it will show the error in the pop-up. That means these three function will handle our logic with the API call and the showing display the model, and these three function will handle creating our prompt or payload, and this specific function will create our prompt, and we are using it inside of these three function. Now we have total 6 function which actually help us to perform the whole thing. So the whole thing means if we know that we have selected, let's say, GPT, then we can call this function to generate our payload, and then we can call this function and pass the payload on that function so that it will actually perform the whole thing. So that's what we actually did in this particular handle method. Here I have created an object with its key like GPT, Grok, Gemini, and if you look closely in the particular key, it's the same key we used in our HTML and specifically in the select method, like select element. As you can see, in the select element we have 3 options, and 3 options have its own value: GPT, Gemini, Grok, and these are the same value that we have used as a key in here. That's mean when we got the selected AI, as you can see, this dot selected AI, this is the value that we actually stored in here. When we initialize our credential, we get the selected AI data from our Chrome storage, and we also set it in our local variable with this dot selected AI so that we can use it. So that's mean when we open the pop-up, we will set it to like GPT. That's mean we will get the value as GPT, and because we have created an object with the key with those value, that's mean if we just call this object and if we click or like if we just destruct that particular object with the value, then we can easily access some function. Let's say what we did here, like for GPT we have 2 function, one is create payload, another is call API, and these are the function that we have created here. So this is the create GPT payload and create like call GPT API, and we just use these 2 function in the name of like GPT. That's mean when we call action.gpt, then we will get the 2 corresponding method for GPT. That's mean we can access like action map.gpt.create payload. That's mean it will help to create the payload for our GPT. And if we call gpt.call API, then it will it will give the format, or it will call the GPT API with taking the format. The same will go for Grok, Gemini. So because we have total 3 and 3 6 function, and for GPT we have 2, Grok 2, and Gemini 2, and we just using those function here so that we can directly call the action map or like use the action map and its property to actually get those particular method. So if you look in this line, then you can see action map, and we are extracting the particular object from this action map, and what we are using the value selected AI. So let's say if we got GPT, that's mean action map.gpt, we need this object, and we are also extracting that object here. That's mean we'll get the create payload and call API, and that's why I use the same name for each object so that we can just directly use the same name. So if we just pass like this dot selected AI, and by default we also pass action.gemini. This means if there are like no selected AI, then we'll pass the default one. We'll only need the default one, and which is the free one. So we will every time we'll get these 2 things like create payload, call API, but it will depend on our selected AI. Let's say if it's like Gemini, then we'll get the Gemini version of it. If it's Grok, then we'll get the Grok version of it. And inside that, we need to call that function as well, as because create payload is not will trigger if you don't call that. So that's why we just created another variable which will call that particular create payload method to create the payload. And what it will do, it will come here and it will call from the action map dot gpt, then it will call this method, then it will call this dot create gpt payload, then it will go there and it will generate the particular prompt from get user content, then it will create or organize the payload, and then it will return the payload. And when it return, you will get it exactly in this particular variable. So this is how the whole flow actually working when you are creating a payload. And because we have the payload and we also have the API like call API which also take the payload, that means if you call the use this API with the payload, then it will call the API and show the model, show the loading, all the thing. So that's why payload creation is important. And we also applied a check if there are no payload, that means you didn't actually select anything or the payload somehow got error, then you will see there are no payload and we are showing like please select something or some kind of like a check or validation. You can just remove it or you can use it because we already check is there are any selected value or not. You can just remove that particular logic, we don't need that anymore. So here we already created the payload, now the time to call the API. So we are using the function like call API from here, as you can see call API, and we are passing the formatted payload that we already built from here. And the call API is coming from our selected model. Let's say it's like Gemini, then we will go to action map.gemini that call API, and which is a function that we declare here which will take the payload, and then it will call the call Gemini API, passing the payload here, and then it will get the payload, then it will pass it through the body with the method like json.stringify, and then we already have the key and the endpoint and the whole thing organized in our call Gemini API function. And that's why when we use this call API method passing the payload, then it will calling that particular API to fetch the response and display the model. So this is how we actually organize our code to handle the whole thing. So handle method is really small, but in that method we have a lot of method used, and that's why the code is more structured and more maintainable. We can write the whole logic here which will maybe took like 200 lines and there will be only handle method, but we didn't do that. We just separated each and every task. We separated for creating payload, we separate another method for creating prompt based on the menu we have selected, then we have independently make some function for calling API, specifically all the tool that we are using, and then we group all the method together so that we can identify which model we are trying to perform, and then based on our selected AI drop down value we are actually calling the API. So that's mean in the UI if we use here like GPT or Gemini, if we save the configuration, that's mean we are storing all the endpoint and the key, and then we are selecting Gemini to perform when we right click on a particular website, and also using some of the tests. So let's say if I try to click the correct grammar method, then you can see it is showing the loading, and as you can see in our network tab it actually called the API. I'm not showing the API request, you will get the key from there. So as you can see, when we get the response back, we are showing the UI in the model and all the text, and if we copy, then it will give us the raw text so that we can paste the text anywhere. And for handling that, as you can see, the action map object is really important. This is how you can group all the method together to use it with the particular selected value, and the selected AI is coming from simply from our storage when we store the API credential from our popup.js. So it's just a simple value, and we also initialized when our prompt handler method or the class created. So it is kind of like that. And beside that, we use like try and catch. So we are handling the error. If there are any error occurred in this particular logic, then it will directly go to our catch section, and in the catch section we also handle that with our popup UI or the model UI. We just displayed the error from our catch method. So this is how we actually handle all the logic in our prompt handler. So if I recap again, first in the context content script, we created a instance of our prompt handler class, and then we call the prompt handler dot handle method. And because we have a UI class, which I'm gonna explain after we finish the handler, so we initialized our UI in our prompt handler class. As you can see in the constructor, we initialize all the values, let's say menus, the selected menus, and also the selected tests, including the UI class and also all the API credential. And then we call the handle method, and because the handling part is really big, so we have to separate each specific task into different function so that we can perform conditionally all the things. So that's why we have three methods for creating payload for each tool. Then we have three methods for calling the API and showing the model or the loading, and then we have one method that will help to generate that prompt, or like a statically written prompt that will help to generate the response. And after that, in the handle model, we just created a action map, which is like an object where we have put all the key as the value that we used in our Popup HTML drop down, so that we can directly identify easily that which model we have selected, because we have the value in our these are selected AI, so that we can directly access by through it. And then we have created the payload, then we actually call the API, and if we got any error, then we show that particular error in the model format. So this is how the prompt handler actually works, and this is the main logic kind of for our extension. So now let's understand our prompt UI, because this is also important, because right now we understand it like not understanding the UI part, we just understand the logic part. But I developed the code a way that you can just directly understand by name of the function, just understanding the function name. So it's like all the function are independent, you can call that function to perform a specific task. So that's why you don't have to understand all the thing first, you can just simply understand the function, and then you can use those functions to perform the task. So in the prompt UI, we have initialization, and before that, let's just understand something from our HTML part. So as you can see in our root folder, you will find a content.html file, and if you open that file in browser, then you can see we have designed a model, and which is the actual model that we showed or displayed in our Chrome extension. So because we are not using any dedicated framework which help us to code and auto reload our code base to check the live refresh or live changes in the browser, so that's why if we just started designing some style or some specific UI, then so you will not be able to design and just develop together in vanilla.js way. Because in vanilla.js, if you try to design or like implement the UI, then as I said earlier, we have to inject the style into our JavaScript, because it is not something what we do in React or like in our as usual framework. We can just design the HTML or like code the HTML and we can see the reflect on the browser. It's not like that. So you have to create a shadow DOM first, then you have to inject your UI into that particular shadow DOM. So that's like a huge task. So if you change or like if there are several UI, then you will not directly code that in editor and see the actual result directly after like refreshing. So it's like a boring task. You have to just design, then you have to refresh it from here, then you have to see the reflection. So for avoiding that case, you can simply create an HTML file, and there you can design the necessary UI or the section that you need to show in your content.script. But in some dedicated framework like WXT or Plasmo, you can directly create or design HTML, or like you can directly use like inject those UI. And because those framework have hot reload functionality, so whenever you save, you can see the reflection on the UI. So this is the fallback when you used a vanilla JavaScript code base to build like a Chrome extension without any bundler. It's like bundler and of course hot reload, it will be really hard to actually maintain or like continue the develop but for understanding or learning purpose, this is really great. So you will understand the fundamental thing or like the fundamental concept of how the Chrome extension work by using vanilla JavaScript. If you directly go to like the dedicated framework, then it will be kind of like trickier to understand that what's happening. So for that case, just create HTML file and design what the desired screen you want to add in your content script. For our case, I have designed the overlay and the model, and also the loading. I think loading is not here. I just take that loading. It was like an SVG. So for our model, if you can see the styles, we have an overlay class which will style our overlay, the black overlay things, and then we have custom model, which is this one, the white background part. And as you can see, we have some minimum height and width, and the border and the shadow. And then we have model content class, model header, button container, and some button class. And as you can see, we have two buttons, and there will be model header and the whole container. So if you look into this in the HTML format, we have a wrapper div, which is the whole overlay, and inside that overlay we have created our, or we have just placed our model, and we have the header and then model content, where we are going to actually push our content. As I said earlier, that we have a show model method that will actually inject our content into that particular model. And you can see model content, the inner HTML, we are parsing the response, like the markdown response that coming from our API, into a HTML format so that we can use it or inject it in our model content. And we have our buttons as a class like button container. So this is a basic style that we need in our content script. So I would recommend to design it in a separated first, then you can just directly use it. So for our case, we have using like this. So in the prompt UI, in the constructor method, when we call the prompt UI, we must have to pass the model title. And as you can see, when we call the prompt UI in our prompt handler, like this, new.prompt UI message.title. So the message was the menu, and as we discussed earlier, the menu have its property called title, and that's why we actually pass the title from here, message.title. And this is where we're actually getting the title, and this is the HTML part, like model HTML. So we just created a variable which will store the HTML, and this is the HTML that we have taken from here, our raw HTML. So we have taken here with all the class name. As you can see, we have all the class name, and of course the header will be our title that we are getting. It will be like correct grammar or summarize, some sort of like that. And then if we don't get any title, then we just pass a default title, which will be hi, how's your day. And then we also added the model content and all the button, and also we have added an ID to identify that particular button, that copy or which one is closed. And because we have to inject the HTML and CSS into the shadow DOM separately, that's why we make those things separate. For HTML we have a variable, for CSS we have another variable, and the CSS are coming from the styles here. So we have created those class, we have added those style, so you can just grab it and paste it in a variable like I did. So these are the same class that I have used in our HTML file. So, and yeah, you have to pass it as a string like this. I just use this to show the particular string, but in a dedicated framework you can use like React, Vue to actually render the UI. So you can just use there with the particular syntax. So the third one we have is loading SVG. That's I said earlier that we are using an SVG which will show the loading. So if I just grab it from here and show or display into our model content, then you maybe see that we have a loading. As you can see, this is the loading, and I grab it from, I think, loading.io. So I grab it from here. You can find some free loading animation that you can use as a SVG format. So this is what we have done so far. Like in our constructor method, we created some variable to actually store those HTML and the CSS and the SVG, which is also parsing as a HTML format. So in the constructor we just created those variable and we just pass those HTML and the style. Now our time is to inject those style into our shadow DOM. So for that case, you can see we call the show model and show loading on our prompt handler. We didn't call any method like initialize or inject style. If you closely watch my earlier section, then you would see like here we didn't call anywhere this initialize method or inject style method, because these are the two methods that will only work on this particular class. So I should make these two methods like private, so that these two methods can't be used outside of this particular class. So because these are the two methods that will help to inject this particular HTML into the shadow DOM, and these are the method that will actually call the initialize and inject style inside of it to display the UI. So let's start with the easier one, the show loading. So the show loading method will check there are any loading indicator available or not. So if there are, then it will return. So the loading indicator is like a class that we are assigning when we are creating the loading. So that's mean if there are any loading happening on the UI, then we don't want to show that particular loading again. So for that case, we must need to give and check so that there are no loading. And then we have created a div element to actually prepare the shadow DOM injection. Like as usual, the process is like we have to create a element, and inside that element we have to put our UI element. Let's say in our UI element this is the SVG, that's mean and for our HTML this is our HTML code. So we have to create a element where we can inject this particular HTML or this HTML so that it actually rendered in the UI. So for that case, we are creating the element with document.create element, and we are creating a div, and in that particular element we are assigning our SVG as in our inner HTML way. That's mean as you can see, we use like object.assign, where you have to pass the object, because when you use create element, then we will get the object, and inside that object we can pass the another object to set all the property. Let's say I have added an ID so that we can check. As you can see how we are checking the ID. So the ID we have added from here, and then for the loading indicator, that element we created, we are passing our this.loading SVG. That's mean we are passing this SVG into the newly created element, and which is loading indicator. And by the end of this line we have a div element, and inside that div element we have the SVG, and now we can use that SVG into our body. Here you can see document.body.append child. We just appended that particular element which have div and the loading. But before that, we also assigned some style. As you can see, that loading indicator.style, which is also an object. And by the way, you must have to understand that what is object.assign do. It will take actually an object, and the second argument or the second parameter you can pass another object, which will be the extra value that will add or assign into your main object, as here. So document.create element div, it will give the an object, and in that particular object we also want to add some other property. Let's say like ID, let's say inner HTML, so something like that. And the same thing we did, but we used it like loading indicator.style, which is an object, and we also added some object. Let's say we have just make it position fixed, and from the bottom is 10 pixel. That's mean it should exactly right here. So that's why I have added like bottom 10 pixel, right 10 pixel, so that it goes over right here, bottom and right here, and it will give a like margin from 10 pixel from right and from bottom. And then we have some width and height is like 50 pixel, and I have added z-index, because you must have to add z-index because we are using it, we want to show the loading in top of our website. So that's why you have to put some like a higher value of z-index so that it not conflict with other UI. And then we have added some background and padding. So this is how we can create element, and inside that element we inject our main HTML element. For our loading case, we have the loading, and then we are actually appending that whole element into our DOM using document.body.append child, and we are passing the loading indicator element. And the whole function means, so in summary, when you call this function, it will create element, it will add those style, and it will append that into the DOM. And when it append into the DOM, you will see the visibility of that particular loading into the DOM. And as you can see, we didn't inject that loading into shadow DOM, we just directly inject it in our main DOM. Because it's kind of a loading, we don't need to use like shadow DOM, but I would highly recommend you to use shadow DOM because these are the style could be conflicted with your main DOM. I just use it for explaining you that you can also use main DOM as well as shadow DOM. So in our show model you can see how I use the shadow DOM injection, but here I just directly append child the element into the main DOM, and it's kind of simple. You don't have to do write a lot of code. So this is for show loading, and for hide loading is simple. We just grab the loading with the ID that we have assigned when we created that particular element, like this, where we put the ID, and we're just simply grabbing that element from our main DOM, because as I said earlier, we are injecting in our main DOM so that you can directly access like document.getElement by ID with the ID, and when we get that element we will just simply remove it from our body, like document.body.remove child and the element that we have. So this like simple, the show loading and show hide loading, it will just create the element and it will inject the loading into our main DOM. And I would say again that I am not recommending you to just directly inject something on your main DOM. Always use the shadow DOM to inject some style specifically from content script in Chrome extension development. So in the show model, first we call our initialize method, and which will create the model, and also it will create the shadow DOM, and then we add the configuration about the markjs library for displaying or highlighting our text to markdown to HTML format, and then we parse the markdown response in a HTML format. Then we just put that into the model content. So that means this dot model content will be the model including the shadow DOM, whatever you can say, where you are going to parse the markdown, and we will parse it and make it HTML, and then we'll put the HTML into our element, and then we will grab the shadow root and we will display it like flex R. So you might wonder that where this shadow root and this model content is coming from, because we don't assign it anywhere. So we assign the model content and the shadow root into the initialize method. So let's understand the initialize method. So the method will take, and we took the markdown raw text as a parameter so that we can actually use in our copy button handler. When we click on that particular copy button, we must need to copy that text into our clipboard, and this is the functionality. So that's why we need that text. And from the starting of the initialize method, we have to create a real DOM including the model, including the style, and we have to prepare a kind of real DOM like this so that we can create a shadow of that particular real DOM. So for doing that, as you can see, this dot model, I took a variable and I created an div element as well as a style element from our document API, and it helped to create this element into a real DOM element. And also in the style, I have added the style that we already added in this particular section, like this dot model CSS. So these are the CSS and this is the HTML, and we have created a div, we have added an style, and style is coming from our main style. So this is kind of like a real DOM with some element. Now the time is to create our shadow DOM. So we have to create our shadow DOM from the model. That's mean we have to create, means like we have to attach. So for doing that, you have to use a method called attach shadow. So this is the method that helps to create shadow DOM based on an element. So our element is this dot model, so we have to create a shadow DOM for that particular element. And if you have to pass mode equal to open so that you can actually get some property between together. So this is now our shadow root, or like the shadow DOM, and now we have to add our main HTML into the shadow DOM. So this was our main HTML. Now if I say like this dot shadow root dot inner HTML will be our model, and as you can see that this dot model was a simple div element which is created by a real DOM. Then we created a shadow DOM, and in the shadow DOM we actually inserted our model.html, as well as we were created a style tag which is also in the real DOM, and then we put our model CSS. But now it's time to inject that style into our shadow DOM as well as. So that's why this dot shadow root dot append child, we have just added or inserted the CSS in that particular shadow root. So this is how you can add HTML CSS in shadow root. So we have added the HTML and and also the CSS in our shadow root. Now it's kind of like a isolated DOM where you can see there are an style and also a div, kind of like similar like this, what we have created in this shadow root. So because we are created the shadow root, now we must have to insert that particular shadow root in our main DOM. And before inserting, we also have to do some other stuff, like we have to handle our onClick method because we have a button inside our. So in the show model, first we call our initialize method, and which will create the model, and also it will create the shadow DOM. And then we add the configuration about the markjs library for displaying or highlighting our text to markdown to HTML format. And then we parse the markdown response in a HTML format. Then we just put that into the model content. So that's mean this dot model content will be the model, including the shadow DOM, whatever you can say, where you are going to parse the markdown, and we will parse it and make it HTML, and then we'll put the HTML into our element, and then we will grab the shadow root and we will display it like flex R. So you might wonder that where this shadow root and this model content is coming from, because we don't assign it anywhere. So we assign the model content and the shadow root into the initialize method. So let's understand the initialize method. So the method will take, and we took the markdown raw text as a parameter so that we can actually use in our copy button handler. When we click on that particular copy button, we must need to copy that text into our clipboard, and this is the functionality. So that's why we need that text. And from the starting of the initialize method, we have to create a real DOM, including the model, including the style, and we have to prepare a kind of real DOM like this so that we can create a shadow of that particular real DOM. So for doing that, as you can see, this dot model, I took a variable and I created an div element as well as a style element from our document API, and it helped to create this element into a real DOM element. And also in the style, I have added the style that we already added in this particular section, like this dot model CSS. So these are the CSS and this is the HTML, and we have created a div, we have added an style, and style is coming from our main style. So this is kind of like a real DOM with some element. Now the time is to create our shadow DOM. So we have to create our shadow DOM from the model. That's mean we have to create, means like we have to attach. So for doing that, you have to use a method called attach shadow. So this is the method that helps to create shadow DOM based on an element. So our element is this dot model, so we have to create a shadow DOM for that particular element. And if you have to pass more equal to open so that you can actually get some property between together. So this is now our shadow root, or like the shadow DOM, and now we have to add our main HTML into the shadow DOM. So this was our main HTML. Now if I say like this dot shadow root dot inner HTML will be our model, and as you can see that this dot model was a simple div element which is created by a real DOM. Then we created a shadow DOM, and in the shadow DOM we actually inserted our model.html, as well as we were created a style tag which is also in the real DOM, and then we put our model CSS. But now it's time to inject that style into our shadow DOM as well as. So that's why this dot shadow root dot append child, we have just added or inserted the CSS in that particular shadow root. So this is how you can add HTML CSS in shadow root. So we have added the HTML and also the CSS in our shadow root. Now it's kind of like a isolated DOM where you can see there are an style and also a div, kind of like similar like this, what we have created in this shadow root. So because we are created the shadow root, now we must have to insert that particular shadow root in our main DOM. And before inserting, we also have to do some other stuff, like we have to handle our onClick method because we have a button inside our HTML. You can see that we have copy button and we have close button. So we must need to handle those buttons before we inject the whole shadow DOM into the real DOM. So that's why you can see that we have to grab the button first like this, and we are targeting from shadow root, this dot shadow root dot query selector, and then the copy button, we already provided the ID in that copy button and also the close button, so we just to target that and also get the reference, and then we are just adding the on click handler both of these buttons. So for copy button, we are actually using our text result that we are getting from the parameter, and this is the actual raw text that we are going to add into the clipboard. So for doing that, we are using navigator API, and inside that we have clipboard, and we're using the write text method, which will take the parameter of a raw text and will save it your clip. And then we are simply hiding our model because after we copy the text, we don't want to show the model anymore. And for the cancel button, we have to just hide the model from the UI, so that's why I just call this dot hide model. And after that, we are actually injecting our shadow root into the main DOM. You can see we are adding the this dot model into the document body, and see what is this dot model. This dot model was the div we have created, and also we have attached shadow in that particular model. So that's mean if we inject this dot model into our main DOM, then we will see the isolated shadow DOM actually appear. And of course we will not see it in fast because in the initialization we have added like display none. So if I just select this class, then you can see this is the main div class that actually wrapping the whole HTML, and for the style it is display none by default. So that case, for showing the model, we must need to make it display flex or display block. So for doing that, we have to do it either in this initialization after here, or maybe we do it on this show model. And what I did is like I apply the thing in our show model because we have to parse our text, which is giving in markdown format, so we need to parse it in HTML format so that we play the text easily. So that's why before appending or before showing the model, we must need to parse our text, and also we need to put that text into our model content, because otherwise we'll only see the model without any response. So that's why in our show model you can see that the markdown converter library code which helping us to configure to show some code highlighting, and then we are actually parsing the markdown to HTML, and we are putting model content.inner HTML, and the model content is the reference that we took from like shadow root.query selector, and for specifically in the HTML it was this content, so we are putting the component or the response in this bullet content. So this is how here we can simply parse it and put it into the element, and then we are just simply calling the shadow root using the query selector to change the style to flex. So it was initially none, but now we have added the response, so now it's time to show the response with the model. So that's why when I just add flex, it actually opens show the model in the UI. That's how like the show model work. And inside here you can see that we already called this dot hide model. So if I go to this dot hide model, so it remove or like close the model. So for doing that, we have to grab that shadow root with the model overlay class, because model overlay ID, because that's the main element. We want to make sure it becomes like the previous one, like display none, so that it will hide from the UI. And of course we have to clear or remove the information or the data from the element, so that when we open again see the new data, otherwise it be conflict. So that's why I just remove the old data, and also I remove this dot model from the main DOM, and this dot model was the element that we have created here. We don't delete this one every time when we close the model, then it will be a problem. Every time we create or open the model, it will create a new. So deleting or removing some JavaScript created element is really important when you're trying your element or the component. So make sure you do that. So, and this is how the hide model and of course the show model. So now let's look into our Chrome extension from UI, and that all the features are working on. Let's refresh it from here and then refresh as well as, and then as you can see in the pop-up, I already have added all the key and the endpoint, and then I have selected Gemini, and when I click on save, then we see save successfully, and we also should see all the menu are correctly showing, and as you see that all the menu are showing properly. Let's try with summarize this particular test. I will go to select summarize, then as you can see we are showing a loading, and of course after the response come, the loading gone, and we are displaying the response in the model. Let's say I want to copy this, and if I copy this and paste this, then the text was copied in our clipboard. Let's try to generate a code reply, a code review. Let's see what it actually gives. So it is giving me there are no code provided, so it will not give the review. So I'm just copying by clicking here, and then if I paste it, text I can paste. And of course you can generate post or reply certain post, or let's to generate a post, and as you can see generated a post, and which is seems like great. So this is how the whole Chrome extension work, including the pop-up, the menus, and also the content that we show when we actually get the response. So thank you for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one.